The transformation of Egypt from scattered hunter-gatherer bands into one of history's most enduring civilizations began along the life-giving waters of the Nile River around 6000 BC. This monumental shift occurred gradually as nomadic groups discovered the predictable annual flooding patterns that deposited fertile silt across the river's banks, creating an agricultural paradise in an otherwise arid landscape. Archaeological evidence from sites like Merimde Beni Salama in the Delta and Badari in Upper Egypt reveals communities that had mastered the cultivation of emmer wheat and barley, while simultaneously domesticating cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. These early settlements displayed remarkable sophistication in their understanding of the Nile's rhythms. Farmers learned to time their planting with the recession of floodwaters, typically occurring between October and December, when the nutrient-rich silt provided optimal growing conditions. The development of basin irrigation systems allowed communities to channel and retain floodwater in rectangular plots surrounded by earthen banks, maximising agricultural yield and supporting larger populations than ever before possible in the region. The transition from mobile hunting parties to permanent agricultural villages fundamentally altered social structures. Storage facilities for surplus grain became focal points of settlements, while specialised crafts emerged as not everyone needed to participate directly in food production. Pottery workshops, flint knapping areas, and textile production centres appeared within villages, indicating the birth of occupational specialisation that would characterise Egyptian society for millennia. The geographical division between Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north created distinct cultural trajectories that would profoundly influence Egyptian civilization. Upper Egypt, stretching from the First Cataract at Aswan to the area around modern-day Cairo, consisted of a narrow river valley flanked by desert cliffs. This confined geography fostered tight-knit communities with strong local identities. Lower Egypt encompassed the broad delta region where the Nile branched into multiple channels before reaching the Mediterranean Sea, creating a landscape of marshlands, lagoons, and fertile islands that supported different settlement patterns and cultural practices. The Badarian culture, flourishing between approximately 4,400–4000 BC, represents our earliest clear picture of pre-dynastic Egyptian civilization. Named after the site of El Badari in Middle Egypt, these communities produced distinctive thin-walled pottery with characteristic rippled surfaces created by combing the clay before firing. Badarian potters achieved remarkable technical skill, creating vessels so delicate they appear almost translucent, with polished red surfaces that often featured black-topped rims achieved through controlled firing techniques. Badarian burial practices reveal sophisticated beliefs about death and the afterlife. Bodies were typically placed in shallow oval pits on their left sides in a contracted position, facing west toward the setting sun. Personal possessions accompanied the deceased, including ivory combs, stone pallets for grinding cosmetics, and carefully crafted flint tools. The presence of imported materials like shells from the Red Sea and stones from the distant quarries indicates extensive trade networks that connected Badarian communities with regions far beyond the Nile Valley. The Naqada first period, also known as Gerzean A or Amratian culture, witnessed significant technological and artistic advances. Named after the site of Naqada in Upper Egypt, excavated by Sir Flinders Petrie in the 1890s, this culture produced pottery decorated with white-painted designs on red clay surfaces. These decorations featured geometric patterns, animals, boats, and human figures that provide invaluable insights into pre-dynastic Egyptian life and beliefs. Naqada pottery frequently depicts boats with multiple oars and distinctive high prows, suggesting that river transportation had become crucial for trade and communication between settlements. Some vessels show boats carrying standards or emblems that may represent early territorial markers or religious symbols. The appearance of boats in funerary contexts indicates their symbolic importance in journeying to the afterlife, a concept that would remain central to Egyptian religious thought throughout the Pharaonic period. Animal representations on Nakadawan pottery reveal the fauna that inhabited Egypt, before increasing aridity transformed much of the surrounding landscape into desert. Elephants, giraffes, ostriches, and various antelope species appear alongside domesticated cattle, indicating that wild game remained an important food source even as agriculture expanded. The artistic treatment of these animals often emphasizes their power and vitality, suggesting early religious significance that would evolve into the complex animal cults of later Egyptian civilization. The Nakada II period marked a crucial phase in Egypt's development toward political unification. Archaeological evidence reveals increasing social stratification, with elite burials containing substantially more grave goods than common interments. Tomb Uj at Abydos, dating to this period, contained over 400 pottery vessels, many imported from Palestine, along with ivory labels bearing some of the earliest hieroglyphic inscriptions found in Egypt. Nakada II pottery styles underwent dramatic changes, with decorated wares giving way to plain, burnished vessels and the introduction of wavy-handled jars that demonstrate clear influence from Palestinian ceramic traditions. This shift reflects intensifying trade relationships and cultural exchange across the Eastern Mediterranean, as Egyptian communities sought luxury goods and raw materials unavailable in the Nile Valley. The period witnessed the emergence of large settlements that can reasonably be called towns rather than villages. Hierakonpolis, located in Upper Egypt near modern-day Edfu, grew to cover over 25 hectares and contained specialized workshop areas for pottery production, brewing and metallurgy. The famous painted tomb at Hierakonpolis, dating to the late Nakada II period, features wall paintings depicting boats, animals, and human figures engaged in what appears to be ceremonial or military activities, providing rare visual evidence of pre-dynastic Egyptian life. Religious beliefs during the Nakada period centered increasingly on concepts that would become fundamental to Pharaonic Egyptian civilization. Animal worship appears to have developed from the practical relationship between humans and the creatures that shared their environment. Cattle, essential for agricultural work and food production, received particular veneration, as evidenced by elaborate cattle burials and artistic representations that emphasize their sacred nature. The origins of mummification can be traced to natural preservation observed in bodies buried in the hot, dry sand of the Egyptian desert. Pre-dynastic Egyptians noticed that corpses interred in simple pit graves often retained skin, hair, and other soft tissues due to rapid dehydration. This natural mummification may have inspired beliefs about bodily preservation being necessary for continued existence in the afterlife, leading to deliberate attempts to enhance preservation through wrapping bodies in linen and placing them in pottery vessels or wooden coffins. Evidence for early divine kingship appears in the increasingly elaborate burials of elite individuals during the Nakada II and III periods. These burials often included regalia and symbols that would become associated with pharaonic authority, such as ceremonial mace heads, ivory labels, and distinctive pottery vessels. The scorpion mace head, discovered at Hierakonpolis and dating to the late pre-dynastic period, depicts a ruler wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt performing what appears to be a ceremonial irrigation ritual, suggesting that royal authority was already connected to control over the Nile's life-giving waters. The Nakada III period represents the final phase before dynastic unification, characterized by rapid political consolidation and cultural homogenization throughout Egypt. Archaeological evidence suggests that Upper Egyptian cultural forms spread northward into the Delta region, either through conquest, trade, or peaceful cultural diffusion. The distinctive Nakada pottery styles appear at sites throughout Lower Egypt, while local Delta traditions gradually disappeared from the archaeological record. Proto-kingdoms emerged during this period, the successful leaders consolidated control over larger territories along the Nile. These early states possessed the administrative capabilities necessary to organize large-scale irrigation projects, coordinate agricultural production across multiple settlements, and maintain trade relationships with distant regions. The development of early writing systems during Naqada III provided rulers with tools for record-keeping and long-distance communication essential for governing expanded territories. Trade networks reached unprecedented complexity during the late pre-dynastic period, connecting Egypt with Nubia to the south, Palestine and Syria to the northeast, and possibly regions as distant as Mesopotamia. Egyptian-made objects have been found at sites throughout the eastern Mediterranean, while foreign goods appear regularly in Egyptian contexts. This exchange of materials and ideas accelerated cultural development and provided Egyptian elites with exotic luxury goods that enhanced their status and authority. The legendary unification of Egypt under a single ruler, traditionally attributed to Menes or Narmer, represents the culmination of centuries of gradual political consolidation. While the historical details remain debated among scholars, archaeological evidence clearly demonstrates that Upper Egyptian cultural and political influence had spread throughout the Nile Valley by 3100 BC. The famous Narmer palette discovered at Hierakonpolis depicts a ruler wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolically representing the unification of the two lands under a single sovereign. The process of unification involved not just military conquest, but also the integration of diverse regional traditions into a unified cultural system. Religious beliefs from different regions were synthesized into coherent mythological narratives, while local deities were incorporated into an expanding pantheon. Administrative practices developed in Upper Egypt were adapted for use throughout the unified kingdom, creating standardized systems of taxation, record-keeping, and resource management. The transformation from the fragmented proto-kingdoms of the late pre-dynastic period into a unified Egyptian state under pharaonic rule represents one of history's most significant political achievements. Around 3100 BC, the ruler known to later Egyptian tradition as Menes, and identified by modern scholars with the historical figure Narmer, completed the conquest of Lower Egypt and established the first dynasty of a unified Egyptian kingdom. The Narmer palette, a ceremonial stone artifact discovered at Hierakonpolis, provides our most vivid contemporary record of this momentous event. On one side, Narmer appears wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, grasping a fallen enemy by the hair while raising a mace to deliver the killing blow. The reverse shows him wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, striding past rows of decapitated enemies whose heads have been placed between their legs in a gruesome display of victory. The unification process involved more than military conquest. It required the creation of entirely new administrative structures capable of governing a territory stretching over 1,000 kilometers from the First Cataract to the Mediterranean coast. Narmer established Memphis as his capital, strategically positioned at the junction between Upper and Lower Egypt, where the Nile Valley meets the delta. This location allowed the new pharaoh to control river traffic moving between the two regions, while maintaining access to both the agricultural wealth of the delta and the mineral resources of Upper Egypt. Memphis quickly grew into Egypt's largest urban centre, with massive mud brick fortifications protecting royal palaces, administrative buildings, and workshops producing goods for the royal court. The establishment of pharaonic regalia during the First Dynasty created visual symbols of royal authority that would endure throughout Egyptian history. The double crown, combining the white crown of Upper Egypt with the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolically represented the pharaoh's dominion over the unified kingdom. Royal ceremonial objects discovered in First Dynasty tombs at Abydos include ivory-handled flint knives with gold leaf decoration, ceremonial mace heads carved from hard stones like porphyry and granite, and scepters topped with carved animal heads representing divine power. The crook and flail, symbols that would become inseparable from pharaonic imagery, first appeared during this period as practical tools transformed into royal insignia, representing the pharaoh's role as shepherd of his people. The development of centralized government required sophisticated administrative systems capable of collecting taxes, organizing labor projects, and maintaining records across vast distances. Early dynasty officials created the first comprehensive bureaucracy in human history, with specialized departments responsible for different aspects of royal administration. The Treasury Department managed the collection and storage of grain taxes from agricultural estates throughout Egypt, while the Works Department organized the massive labor forces required for royal construction projects. Scribal schools attached to major temples trained the literate officials necessary to maintain written records and communicate royal commands to provincial administrators. The hieroglyphic writing system underwent rapid development during the early dynastic period as administrators required increasingly sophisticated methods for recording complex information. Early hieroglyphic inscriptions from First Dynasty royal tombs contain over 800 different signs, indicating that the writing system had already achieved considerable complexity. Royal names were written inside oval cartouches that protected the pharaoh's identity from magical harm, while titles and epithets described the ruler's divine nature and earthly responsibilities. Administrative documents from this period include tax records written on papyrus, property boundaries marked on stone stele, and inventory lists carved on ivory labels attached to storage containers. Standardization of weights and measures facilitated trade and taxation throughout the unified kingdom. Royal workshops produced stone weight standards based on the deben, approximately 91 grams, with smaller units called kite, representing 1/10 of a deben. Linear measurements use the royal cubit, approximately 52.5 centimeters, divided into 7 palms of 4 fingers each. These standards were distributed to provincial administrators and market centres, ensuring consistent measurement practices from Aswan to the Mediterranean. Grain measures use the hecat, roughly equivalent to 4.8 litres, for calculating agricultural taxes and rations distributed to workers on royal projects. Religious developments during the early dynastic period established theological foundations that would support pharaonic authority for 3 millennia. The sun god Ra emerged as the supreme deity of the unified kingdom, with the pharaoh claiming to be his earthly representative. Solar theology provided ideological justification for royal authority by presenting the pharaoh as the son of Ra, responsible for maintaining cosmic order through proper religious observances and just governance. The daily journey of Ra across the sky became a metaphor for the pharaoh's role in bringing light and order to Egypt while defeating the forces of chaos that threatened the kingdom's stability. Ptah, the crater god of Memphis, gained prominence as the new capital's patron deity. Theological texts from this period describe Ptah creating the world through divine speech, speaking all things into existence through the power of his words. This creation myth reinforced the pharaoh's authority by presenting royal commands as echoes of the original creative act that brought order from primordial chaos. The high priest of Ptah at Memphis became one of the most powerful religious officials in Egypt, responsible for maintaining the theological foundations of pharaonic rule and conducting the elaborate rituals that ensured the kingdom's continued prosperity. Horus, the falcon god associated with kingship since pre-dynastic times, was formally incorporated into royal ideology through this development of the Horus name, one of the pharaoh's 5 official titles. Each pharaoh adopted a Horus name upon ascending the throne, identifying himself with this powerful sky god who was believed to inhabit the royal person. The famous Horus and Seth myth, describing the struggle between order and chaos for control of Egypt, provided a theological framework for understanding political conflict and royal succession. Victory reliefs from early dynasty temples show the pharaoh as Horus defeating Egypt's enemies, who are identified with Seth, the god of disorder and foreign lands. Royal burial traditions established during the early dynastic period reflected the pharaoh's divine nature and his expected continuation of royal duties in the afterlife. The royal cemetery at Abydos contained elaborate tomb complexes for the first pharaohs, with underground burial chambers surrounded by hundreds of subsidiary graves containing servants, craftsmen and officials who accompanied their ruler into death. These human sacrifices, unique in Egyptian history, demonstrate the extraordinary reverence accorded to the first pharaohs and the belief that royal authority extended beyond death into the afterlife. The tomb of Pharaoh Djer at Abydos covered an area of approximately 70 by 40 metres, with the central burial chamber constructed of mud brick and timber, then covered with a massive mound of sand and gravel. The burial chamber contained wooden furniture inlaid with ivory and gold, stone vessels carved from precious materials like alabaster and porphyry, and hundreds of pottery jars that once held food, wine and oils for the pharaoh's afterlife sustenance. Subsidiary burials arranged around the royal tomb included 318 individuals, ranging from high court officials buried in wooden coffins to servants interred in simple pit graves. Saqqara emerged as an alternative royal burial ground during the later First Dynasty, with massive mud brick mastaba tombs constructed for high officials and possibly some pharaohs. These rectangular structures, with sloping sides and flat tops, represented architectural innovations that would influence tomb design throughout Egyptian history. The mastaba of Nebitka at Saqqara contained 62 rooms filled with grave goods, including the earliest known stone vessels carved from hard stones like granite and diorite. Wall paintings in these tombs depicted daily life scenes, religious ceremonies, and the deceased receiving offerings from family members and servants. Economic expansion during the early dynastic period supported the growing complexity of pharaonic government and religious institutions. Agricultural productivity increased through improved irrigation systems that extended cultivation into previously marginal areas of the Nile Valley and Delta. Royal engineers supervised the construction of major canals that channeled floodwater to distant fields, while local administrators organised the maintenance of smaller irrigation channels and basin walls. The Fayum Depression, a natural lake basin southwest of Memphis, was first developed for agriculture during this period, through canals connecting it to the Nile, adding thousands of acres of fertile farmland to the royal domain. Copperworking reached new levels of sophistication, as royal workshops produced tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects for the pharaoh and his officials. The Sinai Peninsula became a major source of copper ore, with Egyptian mining expeditions establishing permanent settlements at sites like Serabit el-Khadim. These operations required substantial logistical support, including supply caravans carrying food and water across the desert, security forces protecting miners from Bedouin attacks, and specialised workers capable of extracting ore from underground shafts. Copper ingots from Sinai were transported to workshops in Memphis and other major cities, where craftsmen produced chisels, axes, knives and spear points that were far superior to earlier stone tools. Monumental stone architecture made its first appearance during the early dynastic period, as pharaohs sought to create permanent monuments celebrating their achievements and ensuring their eternal memory. The earliest stone buildings were relatively small structures within larger mud brick complexes, but they demonstrated mastery of techniques that would reach full expression in the Pyramid Age. Quarrying operations in Upper Egypt extracted limestone, sandstone and granite blocks weighing several tons, which were transported by river to construction sites in Memphis and other royal centres. The step pyramid complex of Pharaoh Djoser at Saqqara, built during the Third Dynasty, represents the culmination of early dynastic architectural development. This massive stone structure, rising in 6 steps to a height of 62 metres, was surrounded by a rectangular enclosure wall, containing courtyards, chapels and storage buildings, all constructed of carefully cut limestone blocks. The architect Imhotep, who designed this complex, solved numerous engineering problems related to stone construction, including the creation of stable foundations capable of supporting enormous weight, and the development of lifting techniques for positioning massive blocks at considerable heights. Trade relationships expanded dramatically during the early dynastic period, as Egypt's unified government possessed the resources and organisation necessary to conduct large-scale commercial operations. Nubian gold became increasingly important to the Egyptian economy, with royal expeditions travelling south beyond the First Cataract to establish trading posts and mining camps in the desert regions between the Nile and Red Sea. These operations required substantial military protection, as evidenced by rock inscriptions depicting pharaohs defeating Nubian enemies and establishing Egyptian control over gold-producing regions. The Levantine coast provided Egypt with cedarwood, essential for large construction projects and shipbuilding, along with luxury goods like silver, lapis lazuli, and aromatic resins. Egyptian pottery and stone vessels appear at sites throughout Palestine and Syria, while Levantine products are found in Egyptian tombs and settlement sites. This trade network required diplomatic relationships with local rulers, standardized exchange rates for different commodities, and secure transportation routes protected by Egyptian military forces or allied local authorities. The consolidation of pharaonic power during the early dynastic period created the institutional foundations that would support Egyptian civilization for over 3,000 years. Royal ideology, administrative systems, religious practices, and artistic traditions established during these crucial centuries provided stability and continuity that allowed Egypt to survive political upheavals, foreign invasions, and environmental challenges that destroyed other ancient civilizations. The pharaoh's role as divine ruler, earthly representative of the gods, and supreme administrator of the kingdom became so fundamental to Egyptian society that it persisted virtually unchanged from the First Dynasty through the Ptolemaic period, demonstrating the remarkable success of the political and religious innovations developed during the birth of pharaonic rule. The transition from the early dynastic period to the Old Kingdom marked Egypt's emergence as the ancient world's most architecturally ambitious civilization, fundamentally transforming the relationship between divine kingship and monumental construction. The Third Dynasty pharaoh Djoser initiated this architectural revolution around 2667 BC, when he commissioned his chancellor and architect Imhotep to design a burial monument unlike anything previously attempted in Egypt. The resulting step pyramid at Saqqara represented a quantum leap in construction technology, rising 62 meters above the desert plateau in 6 distinct tiers, each smaller than the one below, creating a massive stone stairway reaching toward the heavens. Imhotep's revolutionary design abandoned the traditional mastaba tomb structure in favour of a completely new architectural concept that reflected evolving religious beliefs about the pharaoh's divine nature and afterlife journey. The step pyramid began as a conventional mastaba measuring 63 by 63 meters, but Imhotep expanded it through successive building phases, first extending it eastward, then adding layers vertically until achieving the final 6-step configuration. The core construction utilised locally quarried limestone blocks, carefully dressed and fitted together without mortar, demonstrating mastery of stone-cutting techniques that had been developing since the late early dynastic period. The subterranean chambers beneath Djoser's pyramid revealed unprecedented complexity and royal burial arrangements. A central shaft ascended 28 meters through solid bedrock to reach the burial chamber, which was sealed with a massive granite plug weighing approximately 3 tons. Surrounding this central burial were over 400 rooms and corridors carved from the living rock, their walls lined with distinctive blue-green faience tiles that replicated the reed matting traditionally used in royal palaces. These underground apartments contained thousands of stone vessels carved from materials including alabaster, granite, serpentine and rock crystal representing the finest craftsmanship of the period. The pyramid complex extended far beyond the monument itself, encompassing a rectangular enclosure measuring 544 by 277 metres and surrounded by a limestone wall standing over 10 metres high. Within this sacred precinct, Imhotep constructed an elaborate architectural program designed to provide Djoser with everything necessary for his eternal reign. The southern tomb, a mysterious structure located near the southern wall of the enclosure, contained a second burial chamber that may have housed the pharaoh's viscera or served as a symbolic tomb for his role as king of Upper Egypt. Ceremonial buildings throughout the complex replicated structures from Memphis and other important centres, allowing Djoser to perform essential royal duties throughout eternity. The House of the South and the House of the North represented the pharaoh's authority over Upper and Lower Egypt respectively, while the Heb-Sed court provided a venue for the eternal celebration of the Royal Jubilee Festival. These buildings utilised engaged columns carved to resemble bundles of papyrus stalks, lotus stems and other plant forms, translating organic architectural elements traditionally constructed from wood and reeds into permanent stone. The workforce required for Djoser's pyramid complex represented a massive mobilisation of human resources that established organisational patterns for all subsequent pyramid construction. Skilled stonemasons, trained in quarrying and dressing limestone blocks, formed the core of the construction teams, supported by thousands of labourers responsible for moving materials and performing general construction tasks. Recent archaeological evidence from workers' villages near pyramid sites indicates that these labourers were not slaves, but rather peasants fulfilling their corvée labour obligations to the state, receiving regular rations of bread, beer, and other provisions during their service. Logistical challenges in pyramid construction required sophisticated planning and coordination capabilities that pushed Egyptian administrative systems to new levels of efficiency. Limestone blocks for Djoser's pyramid were quarried from underground galleries carved directly beneath the construction site, eliminating the need for long-distance transportation of building materials. However, granite elements, including the burial chamber plug and architectural details, required quarrying at Aswan, over 800 kilometres to the south, then transportation by river during the annual flood season when the Nile could accommodate large cargo vessels. The architectural innovations pioneered at Saqqara influenced subsequent pyramid development throughout the Old Kingdom, as pharaohs sought to surpass their predecessors in both scale and sophistication. The 4th dynasty pharaoh Sneferu, founder of the dynasty that would produce the Giza pyramids, constructed 3 separate pyramids during his 24-year reign, each representing experimental advances in pyramid construction technology. His first pyramid at Medum began as a 7-step structure similar to Djoser's monument, but was later modified by filling in the steps and adding a smooth outer casing, creating Egypt's first true pyramid with sloping sides. Sneferu's second pyramid at Dashur, known today as the Bent Pyramid, demonstrates the engineering challenges involved in transitioning from step pyramid to true pyramid construction. The monument rises at an angle of 54 degrees for the lower 2/3 of its height, then abruptly changes to a shallower 43-degree angle for the upper section. This distinctive profile resulted from structural problems that developed during construction, forcing the architects to reduce the angle to prevent collapse. Internal chambers within the bent pyramid reveal experimental approaches to relieving structural stress, including corbelled ceilings and multiple entrance passages designed to distribute weight more effectively. The Red Pyramid, Sneferu's third and final monument, achieved the first successful construction of a true pyramid with consistent slope angles from base to apex. Rising to a height of 104 metres with sides sloping at 43 degrees, this pyramid incorporated lessons learned from the earlier experiments at Meidum and Dashur. The internal chamber system utilised sophisticated corbelling techniques to create stable vaulted ceilings capable of supporting enormous weight, while the external casing blocks were cut with unprecedented precision to achieve perfectly smooth faces. Sneferu's pyramid-building activities required mobilization of resources on a scale that transformed Egyptian society and government. Modern calculations suggest that the three pyramids together contain approximately 3.7 million cubic meters of stone, requiring the quarrying, transportation, and precise placement of over 9 million individual blocks. The workforce necessary for these projects included not only construction workers, but also the administrative personnel required to organise food supplies, tool production, transportation systems, and the complex logistics of coordinating multiple simultaneous construction sites. The reign of Khufu witnessed the culmination of Old Kingdom pyramid construction with the creation of the Great Pyramid at Giza, a monument that remained the world's tallest building for over 3,800 years. Originally standing 146.5 metres high, with a base measuring 230.4 metres on each side, the Great Pyramid contained approximately 2.3 million stone blocks averaging 2.5 tonnes each, with some granite elements weighing up to 80 tonnes. The precision of construction achieved tolerances that would challenge modern engineering capabilities, with the base perimeter accurate to within 2 centimetres and the orientation aligned to cardinal directions within 3 arc minutes. The internal architecture of Khufu's pyramid demonstrates sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles and reflects evolving concepts about the pharaoh's afterlife journey. The original burial chamber, carved from bedrock beneath the pyramid's base, was abandoned during construction in favour of the Queen's Chamber, located within the pyramid's masonry. This chamber was itself superseded by the King's Chamber, positioned high within the pyramid's core and accessed through the spectacular Grand Gallery, a corbelled passage rising at a 26-degree angle and measuring 47 metres in length. The King's Chamber represents the apex of Old Kingdom architectural achievement, constructed entirely of red granite quarried at Aswan and transported over 800 kilometres to Giza. 5 relieving chambers above the burial chamber distribute the enormous weight of the pyramid's upper sections, while the chamber itself maintains perfect proportions based on the golden ratio. The granite sarcophagus within the chamber was carved from a single block and positioned during construction as its dimensions exceed those of the ascending passages leading to the chamber. Construction techniques employed at Giza demonstrate remarkable innovation in moving and positioning massive stone blocks with the technological capabilities available in the 3rd millennium BC. Ramp systems, evidenced by surviving stone ramps at various pyramid sites, allowed workers to drag blocks up inclined planes to reach higher levels of construction. These ramps utilised a combination of straight ramps for initial lifting and zigzag or spiral ramps wrapped around the pyramid's growing structure for reaching the upper courses. The organisation of pyramid construction workforces reveals sophisticated management systems that coordinated the efforts of thousands of individuals across multiple specialised tasks. Papyrus documents from pyramid complexes describe work gangs with colourful names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure, each containing approximately 2,000 workers divided into crews of 200 men. These crews were further subdivided into teams of 20 workers, each with specific responsibilities including quarrying, transportation, stone dressing and construction. Archaeological excavations at Giza have revealed extensive infrastructure supporting pyramid construction, including workers' villages, bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves daily, breweries, copper workshops for tool production, and medical facilities for treating injured workers. The workers' cemetery at Giza contains over 600 burials of individuals who died during pyramid construction. Their skeletal remains showing evidence of heavy physical labour but also adequate nutrition and medical care, contradicting popular misconceptions about slave labour. The pyramid complexes of Khafra and Menkaure completed the Giza necropolis while demonstrating continued innovation in pyramid construction and associated religious architecture. Khafra's pyramid, though slightly smaller than his father's monument, incorporates sophisticated features including a complex internal passage system and the retention of casing stones at the apex that preserve the monument's original smooth surface. The associated Valley Temple, constructed of massive granite blocks weighing up to 200 tons each, demonstrates mastery of megalithic construction techniques rivaling those of any ancient civilization. The Great Sphinx, carved from a natural limestone outcrop during Khafre's reign, represents the ultimate fusion of royal portraiture with religious symbolism. Measuring 73 meters in length and 20 meters in height, the Sphinx combines a human head, probably representing Khafre himself, with a lion's body symbolizing royal power and divine authority. The monument's orientation toward the rising sun reflects the growing importance of solar theology and Old Kingdom religious thought, while its position guarding the approach to Khafre's pyramid complex emphasizes the pharaoh's role as a protector of Egypt. Menkaur's pyramid, though smaller than its predecessors at only 65 meters in height, incorporated luxury materials including red granite casing blocks for the lower courses and elaborate internal decorations. The associated temple complex revealed some of the finest royal sculpture of the Old Kingdom, including the famous triads showing Menkaure, flanked by the goddess Hathor and various gnome deities, demonstrating the integration of royal ideology with local religious traditions throughout Egypt. The development of divine kingship ideology during the Old Kingdom reached unprecedented sophistication through theological innovations that presented the pharaoh as the living embodiment of divine power on earth. The pharaoh's fivefold titulary, fully developed by the 4th dynasty, included the Horus name identifying him with the sky god, the two ladies' name invoking the protective goddesses of Upper and Lower Egypt, the golden Horus name emphasizing his divine nature, the prenomen enclosed in a cartouche and preceded by the title King of Upper and Lower Egypt, and the nomen or birth name also in a cartouche and preceded by Son of Ra. Royal ideology emphasized the pharaoh's unique position as intermediary between the divine and human realms, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order that ensured Egypt's prosperity and stability. This concept extended beyond simple justice to encompass the proper functioning of natural phenomena, including the Nile flood, the movement of celestial bodies, and the fertility of crops and livestock. Royal rituals performed daily in temples throughout Egypt reinforced the pharaoh's cosmic responsibilities, while major festivals celebrated his role in renewing the world's divine energy. The administrative system supporting Old Kingdom pharaohs represented the ancient world's most sophisticated bureaucratic organization, capable of governing a territory stretching from Nubia to the Mediterranean while coordinating massive construction projects and maintaining detailed records of government activities. The vizier, serving as the pharaoh's chief minister, supervised all aspects of royal administration including taxation, justice, public works, and provincial governance. This position, first clearly documented during the 4th dynasty, required individuals of exceptional ability capable of managing complex administrative hierarchies and making decisions affecting millions of people. Provincial administration divided Egypt into approximately 42 nomes or administrative districts, each governed by a nomarch appointed by the pharaoh and responsible for tax collection, law enforcement, and coordination of royal projects within his territory. These officials maintained detailed records of agricultural production, population levels, and resource availability, forwarding regular reports to Memphis that allowed central administrators to plan national policies and allocate resources effectively. The nomarch system created a stable administrative framework that persisted throughout Egyptian history, adapting to changing political circumstances while maintaining essential governmental functions. The extensive bureaucracy required to manage Old Kingdom Egypt employed thousands of scribes trained in hieroglyphic writing, mathematics, and administrative procedures. Scribal schools attached to major temples and government offices produced literate officials capable of maintaining the complex records necessary for effective governance. These schools taught not only practical skills but also the ethical principles expected of government officials, emphasizing honesty, diligence, and loyalty to the pharaoh as essential virtues for successful administrative careers. Religious developments during the Old Kingdom established theological foundations that would influence Egyptian civilization for millennia. The rise of the Ra cult at Heliopolis created a unified solar theology that integrated local religious traditions into a coherent mythological system supporting pharaonic authority. Ra's daily journey across the sky in his solar bark became a powerful metaphor for the pharaoh's role in bringing order and prosperity to Egypt, while the sun god's nightly passage through the underworld provided a model for royal afterlife beliefs. The pyramid texts, first appearing in the Pyramid of Pharaoh Unaz at the end of the 5th dynasty, represent humanity's oldest religious literature and provide invaluable insights into Old Kingdom beliefs about death, resurrection, and the pharaoh's divine nature. These hieroglyphic inscriptions, covering the walls of burial chambers in late Old Kingdom pyramids, contain over 700 individual spells designed to ensure the pharaoh's successful transformation into a divine being capable of joining Ra in his eternal solar journey. The magnificent edifice of Old Kingdom civilization began showing signs of structural weakness during the extraordinarily long reign of Pepi II, who ruled for approximately 94 years from 2278 to 2184 BC. What initially appeared as remarkable stability gradually transformed into administrative paralysis as the aging pharaoh lost effective control over Egypt's vast bureaucratic machinery. Provincial governors, originally appointed by royal decree and dependent on pharaonic favour for their positions, began treating their offices as hereditary possessions, establishing local dynasties that competed with Memphis for authority over taxation, justice, and religious affairs. The nomarchs of powerful provinces like Asyut, Heracleopolis, and Thebes constructed elaborate tombs rivaling royal monuments in scale and decoration, openly displaying wealth and independence that would have been unthinkable during the 4th dynasty. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout Egypt reveals declining royal authority during Pepi II's later years, as provincial officials ceased forwarding tax revenues to Memphis and redirected resources toward local projects. The pyramid complex of Pepi II at Saqqara, though initially planned on a grand scale comparable to earlier Old Kingdom monuments, shows clear evidence of construction shortcuts and reduced quality in workmanship. Subsidiary pyramids for queens and royal family members remained unfinished, while the causeway connecting the pyramid to its valley temple was never completed with the fine limestone relief decoration typical of earlier royal monuments. Climate change compounded the political crisis engulfing Egypt during the late Old Kingdom, as shifting weather patterns in the Ethiopian highlands disrupted the annual Nile flood cycle that formed the foundation of Egyptian agricultural prosperity. Paleoclimatic data from lake sediments and ice cores indicates that the period between 2200 and 2000 BC witnessed significant aridification across North Africa and the eastern Mediterranean, with reduced monsoon activity in the headwaters of the Blue Nile, leading to a series of catastrophically low floods in Egypt. The Nilometer records from Elephantine Island document flood levels during this period that fell well below the minimum required for successful agriculture, creating widespread famine and social unrest. The failure of successive Nile floods created cascading economic and social crises that undermined the ideological foundations of pharaonic rule. Egyptian royal ideology had always presented the pharaoh as the divine guarantor of Egypt's agricultural prosperity, responsible through proper religious observances for ensuring the annual flood that renewed the land's fertility. When the floods failed repeatedly despite royal rituals and temple offerings, popular confidence in pharaonic authority collapsed. Contemporary texts describe widespread questioning of traditional religious beliefs and social hierarchies, as desperate populations sought explanations for the unprecedented catastrophe befalling their civilization. The Admonitions of Ipuwer, a literary text probably composed during the First Intermediate Period, though preserved in later copies, provides a vivid contemporary account of the social upheaval accompanying the Old Kingdom's collapse. Ipuwer describes a world turned upside down, where the poor have become rich and the rich have become poor. Servants wear fine linen while their former masters go naked, and the land spins around like a potter's wheel. The text depicts widespread violence and lawlessness, with blood everywhere and the dead thrown into the river, while traditional social distinctions dissolve as "he who possessed no property now owns riches." The administrative records from provincial centres reveal the practical mechanisms through which central authority disintegrated during this period. Tax collection systems that had functioned efficiently for centuries broke down as local officials retained revenues for regional needs, rather than forwarding them to Memphis. The elaborate courier networks that had connected the capital with distant provinces ceased operating, leaving central administrators without reliable information about conditions in outlying areas. Military units stationed in provincial garrisons transferred their loyalty from the pharaoh to local governors who could provide regular pay and provisions, creating the armed forces necessary for regional independence movements. Following Pepi II's death around 2184 BC, the Memphite royal line fragmented into competing claimants who lack the resources or authority to maintain unified control over Egypt. The 7th and 8th dynasties, ruling from Memphis, represented increasingly ineffective attempts to preserve the fiction of pharaonic unity while exercising actual authority over progressively smaller territories. Manetho's account describes the 7th dynasty as consisting of 70 kings who ruled for 70 days, though this obviously represents literary exaggeration rather than historical fact. Archaeological evidence suggests that several individuals claiming royal titles ruled simultaneously from Memphis during this period, each controlling only limited territories in the immediate vicinity of the ancient capital. The political vacuum created by Memphis's weakness enabled ambitious provincial governors to establish independent kingdoms throughout Egypt. The most successful of these regional powers emerged in Heracleopolis, strategically positioned in Middle Egypt where the Fayum Depression meets the Nile Valley. The Heracleopolitan rulers, constituting the 9th and 10th dynasties according to Manetho's scheme, claimed legitimacy as successors to the Memphite pharaohs while exercising effective control over a territory extending from Memphis southward to Asyut. Their capital at Heracleopolis commanded important agricultural regions and trade routes, providing the economic foundation necessary for sustained political independence. Archaeological excavations at Heracleopolitan sites reveal a conscious effort to maintain Old Kingdom cultural traditions while adapting to the reduced circumstances of the First Intermediate Period. Royal monuments from this period, though smaller than their Old Kingdom predecessors, display sophisticated artistic programs emphasizing the ruler's legitimacy and divine authority. The tomb of Kheti III at Heracleopolis contained relief sculptures depicting the king receiving tribute from foreign lands and performing traditional royal ceremonies, maintaining the iconographic conventions of pharaonic rule despite the fragmented political reality. The Teaching for King Merikar, a wisdom text purportedly written by a Heracleopolitan pharaoh for his son and successor, provides insights into the political philosophy and practical challenges facing regional rulers during this period. The text emphasizes the importance of effective administration, just governance, and military preparedness, while acknowledging the reduced circumstances compared to the Old Kingdom. The author advises his successor to make your officials great, advance your soldiers, increase the young men who follow you, recognizing that political authority now depended on personal loyalty rather than traditional respect for pharaonic office. Meanwhile, In Upper Egypt, the nomarchs of Thebes began consolidating control over the southernmost provinces of Egypt, establishing an independent kingdom that would eventually reunify the country under Middle Kingdom rule. The early Theban rulers, known collectively as the 11th dynasty, initially controlled only a small territory around modern-day Luxor, but gradually extended their influence northward through military conquest and diplomatic alliance. Unlike their Heracleopolitan rivals, who attempted to preserve Old Kingdom traditions, the Thebans developed new forms of royal ideology emphasizing their role as champions of order against chaos and protectors of Egypt against foreign invasion. The struggle between Heracleopolitan and Theban kingdoms dominated the political landscape of the First Intermediate Period, creating a north-south division that persisted for over a century. Contemporary texts describe this conflict in terms of cosmic struggle between order and chaos, with each side claiming divine sanction for their cause. The Heracleopolitans emphasized their connection to Memphis and the ancient pharaonic traditions, while the Thebans presented themselves as defenders of Egyptian civilization against foreign infiltration and internal disorder. Military technology and tactics underwent significant development during the First Intermediate Period as regional rulers competed for territorial control. The traditional Egyptian military organization, based on conscripted peasant levies led by professional officers, proved inadequate for the sustained warfare characterizing this era. Regional armies increasingly relied on professional soldiers, including foreign mercenaries from Nubia and the Levant, who possessed superior military skills and equipment. Nubian archers, renowned throughout the ancient Near East for their accuracy and effectiveness, served in the armies of both Heracleopolitan and Theban rulers, while Asiatic warriors introduced new weapons including composite bows and bronze-tipped spears. Archaeological evidence from fortified sites throughout Egypt reveals the militarization of Egyptian society during the First Intermediate Period. Provincial centres constructed massive defensive walls with sophisticated gate systems and projecting towers designed to withstand siege warfare. The fortress of Heracleopolis featured walls over 10 metres high, built of mud brick reinforced with timber, while similar fortifications protected Theban strongholds in Upper Egypt. These defensive works required substantial labour forces and represented major investments of regional resources in military infrastructure. The economic disruption accompanying political fragmentation fundamentally altered Egyptian society and culture during the First Intermediate Period. The collapse of centralized administration eliminated the redistributive systems that had channeled agricultural surplus from wealthy provinces to support specialized craftsmen, scribes, and religious personnel in major urban centers. Provincial workshops producing luxury goods for royal and elite consumption ceased operation, while local artisans adapted their skills to serve regional markets with reduced resources and simpler aesthetic preferences. Artistic production during the First Intermediate Period reflects both the economic constraints and cultural innovations of this transitional era. Provincial workshops developed distinctive regional styles that departed from the standardized conventions of Old Kingdom royal art. Relief sculptures in tombs of regional officials display greater naturalism and emotional expression than their Old Kingdom predecessors, while painting and sculpture incorporate local religious traditions previously excluded from official artistic programs. The famous painted tomb of Ankhtifi at Moala, dating to the early First Intermediate Period, features vivid scenes of daily life and agricultural activities rendered with unprecedented attention to individual detail and regional specificity. Religious developments during the First Intermediate Period reflected the profound social and political transformations affecting Egyptian civilization. The collapse of centralized royal authority undermined traditional theological concepts, presenting the pharaoh as the exclusive intermediary between divine and human realms. Provincial religious centers gained independence from Memphis-based theological systems, developing local variations of national religious traditions while incorporating regional deities and practices previously marginalized by royal orthodoxy. The democratization of afterlife beliefs, evidenced by the appearance of pyramid texts in non-royal tombs, reflected changing social hierarchies and religious concepts during this period of political fragmentation. The prophecy of Nefertiti, composed during the First Intermediate Period but set during the Old Kingdom reign of Sneferu, presents a retrospective interpretation of the collapse of pharaonic civilization from the perspective of Middle Kingdom reunification. The text describes a sage prophesying the coming chaos. The land is diminished, its rulers are increased. It is bare, its taxes are great, the grain is little, the measure is large. Nefertiti predicts that a king will come from the south who will restore order and prosperity to Egypt, clearly referring to the eventual Theban conquest that established the Middle Kingdom. The gradual reunification process began during the reign of the Theban ruler Intef I, who expanded Theban control northward from the traditional boundary at Gebelen toward the important provincial centre of Abydos. Military campaigns during this period involved both siege warfare against fortified towns and naval battles for control of Nile transportation routes. The Theban superior position in Upper Egypt provided access to Nubian gold and military recruits, while their control over the traditional religious centre of Abydos enhanced their legitimacy claims against Heracleopolitan rivals. Intef II continued the northward expansion of Theban authority through a series of military campaigns that brought the important nome centres of Dendera, Coptos, and eventually Abydos under Theban control. Contemporary inscriptions describe these conflicts in terms of righteous warfare against forces of disorder, with Theban victories presented as divine vindication of their royal claims. The successful siege of Abydos represented a crucial turning point in the reunification struggle, as control over this ancient religious centre provided the Thebans with enhanced legitimacy and access to the wealthy agricultural regions of Middle Egypt. The final phase of reunification occurred under Mentuhotep II, whose 51-year reign witnessed the complete defeat of Heracleopolitan resistance and the re-establishment of unified pharaonic rule over Egypt. Military campaigns during the later years of his reign extended Theban control northward to Memphis and the Delta, while southern expeditions secured the Nubian frontier and re-established Egyptian authority over the gold-producing regions beyond the First Cataract. The successful completion of reunification around 2055 BC marked the beginning of the Middle Kingdom and the restoration of centralized pharaonic government after more than a century of political fragmentation. The completion of reunification under Mentuhotep II around 2055 BC initiated a comprehensive transformation of Egyptian political and administrative structures, as the Theban victors faced the monumental challenge of governing a territory that had experienced over a century of fragmentation and regional autonomy. The establishment of Thebes as Egypt's new political centre represented a fundamental shift from the Memphis-centred administration that had characterised the Old Kingdom, requiring the creation of entirely new bureaucratic systems capable of integrating the diverse regional traditions that had developed during the First Intermediate Period. Mentuhotep II's architects constructed a massive mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari on the west bank of the Nile opposite Thebes, featuring a unique terrace design that incorporated elements of both pyramid and mastaba tomb traditions, while establishing distinctly Middle Kingdom architectural conventions. The relocation of royal power to Thebes necessitated the development of new administrative structures adapted to the changed political landscape of reunified Egypt. Unlike the Old Kingdom system that had evolved gradually from early dynastic precedents, Middle Kingdom administrators had to consciously design governmental institutions capable of managing provinces that had maintained semi-independent status for generations. The Vizier's office, reconstituted under Mentuhotep II, assumed expanded responsibilities including direct oversight of provincial nomarchs, who retained significant local authority while acknowledging royal supremacy. This delicate balance between central control and regional autonomy required sophisticated diplomatic skills and administrative flexibility, previously unnecessary during the Old Kingdom's more autocratic governmental system. Military reorganization under the early Middle Kingdom reflected lessons learned during the prolonged civil wars of the First Intermediate period, as Theban rulers recognized that traditional Egyptian military structures proved inadequate for maintaining unified control over a geographically vast and politically diverse kingdom. Professional military units replaced the conscripted peasant levies that had characterized Old Kingdom armies, with career soldiers receiving regular pay, equipment and land grants in exchange for loyal service to the crown. Nubian mercenaries, whose archery skills had proven decisive during the reunification campaigns, were integrated into permanent military formations stationed at strategic points throughout Egypt, while Egyptian officers received advanced training in siege warfare, fortification design, and the coordination of combined infantry and naval operations. The establishment of permanent military garrisons at key strategic locations throughout Egypt represented a significant innovation in Middle Kingdom administrative policy, as these installations served dual functions as defensive strongpoints and centres for royal administration in outlying provinces. The fortress of Buhen, constructed during the early Middle Kingdom near the Second Cataract in Nubia, exemplified this integrated approach to military and civilian administration. The massive mud brick fortifications, featuring walls over 10 metres high with projecting bastions and elaborate gate systems, protected not only military personnel but also civilian administrators, craftsmen and merchants who conducted royal business in the region. Internal buildings within the fortress included administrative offices, storage facilities, workshops, and residential quarters arranged according to strict hierarchical principles that reflected Middle Kingdom social organisation. The cultural renaissance accompanying political reunification manifested most dramatically in the development of classical Egyptian literature that would influence artistic and intellectual traditions throughout the remainder of pharaonic history. Royal patronage of literary production created an environment conducive to sophisticated artistic expression, as court scribes and provincial intellectuals competed to create works celebrating the restored pharaonic order while exploring universal themes of justice, wisdom, and human nature. The literary works produced during this period established narrative techniques, poetic conventions, and philosophical concepts that became fundamental elements of Egyptian cultural identity. The story of Sinuhe emerged as the masterpiece of Middle Kingdom narrative literature, recounting the adventures of a court official who fled Egypt following the assassination of Amenemhat I and spent years in exile among the Bedouin tribes of Palestine before eventually returning to royal favour under Senusret I. The text combines political intrigue, adventure narrative, and philosophical reflection in a sophisticated literary structure that demonstrates the maturity of Middle Kingdom Egyptian prose. Sinuhe's detailed descriptions of foreign lands and peoples provide invaluable ethnographic information about the Levantine populations with whom Egypt maintained complex diplomatic and commercial relationships, while his psychological struggles with exile and eventual redemption explore themes of identity, loyalty, and divine providence that resonated throughout Egyptian society. The narrative technique employed in the story of Sinuhe reveals sophisticated understanding of character development and dramatic structure previously absent from Egyptian literature. Sinuhe's initial flight from Egypt is motivated by panic and political uncertainty rather than guilt or wrongdoing, creating a complex protagonist whose actions result from psychological realism rather than simple moral categories. His gradual adaptation to life among the Asiatic tribes demonstrates Egyptian awareness of cultural diversity and the possibility of finding meaning and success outside traditional Egyptian social structures. while his eventual homesickness and desire to return reflects deep attachment to Egyptian cultural identity that transcends political circumstances. The tale of the eloquent peasant represents another pinnacle of Middle Kingdom literary achievement, presenting the story of a peasant named Kun Anup, whose goods are stolen by a corrupt official, leading to a series of increasingly elaborate speeches demanding justice from higher authorities. The text's 9 separate speeches, each more rhetorically sophisticated than the previous, demonstrate masterful command of Egyptian oratorical traditions while exploring fundamental questions about justice, social responsibility, and the proper relationship between rulers and subjects. The peasant's eloquent arguments combine practical legal reasoning with sophisticated metaphorical language, creating a literary tour de force that celebrates both intellectual achievement and social justice. The philosophical dimensions of the tale of the eloquent peasant reflect Middle Kingdom concerns about governmental accountability and the protection of individual rights within hierarchical social systems. The peasant's repeated appeals to higher authorities, each time receiving sympathetic hearings but no immediate action, mirror the complex bureaucratic procedures that characterized Middle Kingdom administration, while highlighting the potential for abuse within such systems. The eventual resolution, in which the peasant receives not only compensation for his losses, but also appointment to an official position, demonstrates Middle Kingdom ideals about social mobility based on merit and the responsibility of rulers to protect their subjects from injustice. Wisdom literature flourished during the Middle Kingdom as educated Egyptians sought to codify ethical principles and practical advice for successful living in an increasingly complex society. The teaching of Amenemhat I purports to record the deathbed advice of the dynasty's founder to his son and successor, though the text was probably composed during the reign of Senusret I as a piece of royal propaganda designed to justify the new dynasty's political policies. The work emphasizes the isolation and vulnerability of royal power, warning that trust no brother, know no friend, make no intimates, while simultaneously advocating for strong central government and military preparedness as necessary responses to the political chaos of the First Intermediate Period. The teaching of Ptahhotep, though originally composed during the Old Kingdom, was extensively revised and expanded during the Middle Kingdom to reflect contemporary social conditions and administrative practices. The Middle Kingdom version includes additional maxims addressing the proper behaviour of officials within complex bureaucratic hierarchies, the importance of education and literacy for career advancement, and the ethical obligations of individuals toward their families and communities. These additions reflect the democratization of administrative opportunities that characterized Middle Kingdom society, as career advancement became increasingly based on ability and education rather than hereditary status alone. Religious wisdom texts from the Middle Kingdom period reveal sophisticated theological thinking about the nature of divine justice and human responsibility within cosmic order. The Admonitions of an Egyptian Sage presents a dialogue between a wise man and his heart, exploring the apparent contradiction between divine justice and the prevalence of suffering and injustice in human experience. The text's philosophical sophistication rivals contemporary wisdom literature from Mesopotamia, while maintaining distinctly Egyptian theological perspectives about the relationship between individual behaviour and cosmic harmony. The territorial expansion and fortification programs initiated under Senusret I represented systematic efforts to secure Egypt's borders while extending pharaonic authority over economically valuable regions beyond the traditional boundaries of the Nile Valley. The conquest of Lower Nubia during Senusret I's reign involved coordinated military campaigns that combined riverborne assaults with overland marches through the eastern desert, demonstrating sophisticated logistical planning and strategic coordination. Egyptian forces established permanent control over the region between the First and Second Cataracts, constructing massive fortifications at strategic locations while organising the systematic exploitation of Nubian gold deposits that would finance Middle Kingdom prosperity for centuries. The fortress system constructed in Nubia under Senusretman and his successors represents one of the most impressive military engineering achievements of the ancient world, featuring massive stone and mud brick fortifications designed to withstand prolonged siege warfare, while serving as administrative centres for Egyptian colonial administration. The fortress of Semna, built during the reign of Senusret Thutrit at the southern boundary of Egyptian control, featured walls over 15 metres high constructed of locally quarried sandstone blocks, with elaborate gate systems incorporating multiple defensive barriers and killing zones designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined areas where they could be effectively engaged by defensive archers and spearmen. The internal layout of Nubian fortresses reflected sophisticated understanding of military architecture and urban planning principles adapted to colonial administrative requirements. Residential quarters were arranged according to strict hierarchical principles, with the fortress commander's residence occupying the highest and most defensible position within the complex, while subordinate officers, civilian administrators, craftsmen, and common soldiers were housed in progressively less prestigious locations. Storage facilities, workshops, and administrative offices were positioned to facilitate efficient operation while maintaining security against both external attack and internal rebellion. Senusret III's military campaigns extended Egyptian control further south than any previous pharaoh, with inscriptions at Semna recording the establishment of the southern boundary at the Second Cataract and the construction of additional fortifications to secure this expanded frontier. The king's personal participation in these campaigns, documented in contemporary inscriptions and later literary works, demonstrated royal commitment to territorial expansion while providing opportunities for the pharaoh to display military prowess and leadership qualities essential for maintaining political authority. Boundary stelae erected at Semna contain detailed descriptions of the new frontier, warning future generations against allowing this boundary to be crossed by Nubian forces while celebrating the military achievements that established Egyptian dominance over the region. The exploitation of Nubian gold mines under Middle Kingdom administration involves sophisticated mining techniques and extensive logistical support systems that transformed Egypt into the ancient world's wealthiest civilization. Gold extraction operations in the Eastern Desert required the construction of permanent settlements to house miners, security forces, and administrative personnel, along with supply routes connecting these remote locations with Nile Valley population centres. The Wadi Hamama inscriptions document large-scale mining expeditions involving thousands of workers, including skilled miners, security forces, administrative personnel, and support staff necessary for sustained operations in harsh desert environments. Mining techniques employed in Nubian gold extraction demonstrate remarkable technological sophistication, adapted to local geological conditions and available labour resources. Underground shafts followed gold-bearing quartz veins deep into bedrock, with galleries extending horizontally to maximise ore extraction while minimising structural instability. Ventilation systems using natural air currents and artificial shafts provided breathable air to workers operating at considerable depths, while drainage systems channeled groundwater away from active mining areas. Ore processing facilities at mining sites included crushing installations for breaking down quartz gold matrix and washing areas where gold was separated from waste rock using water and gravity separation techniques. The administrative systems governing Nubian mining operations required careful coordination between military, civilian, and technical personnel operating under challenging conditions far from traditional Egyptian population centres. Mining expeditions were organised as royal monopolies under direct pharaonic control, with specialised administrators responsible for planning operations, recruiting workers, organising supply systems, and ensuring the security of extracted gold during transportation to Egypt. Records from these operations provide detailed insights into Middle Kingdom administrative procedures and the sophisticated planning capabilities that enabled Egypt to maintain profitable mining operations across vast distances and challenging terrain. Religious developments during the Middle Kingdom reflected the democratization of afterlife beliefs that had begun during the first intermediate period, as traditional concepts about divine kingship and exclusive royal access to eternal life were modified to accommodate changing social conditions and popular religious expectations. The spread of Assyrian beliefs throughout Egyptian society represented a fundamental transformation in religious thinking, as the myth of Osiris provided a theological framework for understanding death and resurrection that was accessible to all Egyptians, regardless of social status. This democratization process did not eliminate social distinctions in death, but rather extended the possibility of afterlife survival to broader segments of the population, while maintaining hierarchical differences in the quality and elaborateness of burial provisions. The rise of Osiris worship during the Middle Kingdom involved the integration of this originally local deity from the Delta region into a comprehensive theological system that addressed fundamental questions about death, judgment, and moral responsibility. The Osiris myth, fully developed by the Middle Kingdom period, presented the god as a righteous ruler murdered by his jealous brother Seth, then restored to life through the magical intervention of his wife Isis and sister Nephthys. This narrative provided a powerful metaphor for the triumph of order over chaos and the possibility of resurrection through proper religious observances and moral behaviour. The theological implications of Assyrian beliefs extended far beyond funerary practices to encompass fundamental questions about divine justice and human moral responsibility. The concept of post-mortem judgment, in which the deceased's heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at to determine worthiness for eternal life, established ethical standards that influence behaviour throughout life, rather than merely at death. This moral dimension of Osirian theology created new relationships between religious belief and social behaviour, as individuals were encouraged to act justly, not merely to avoid earthly punishment, but to ensure favourable treatment in the afterlife. The integration of local deities into the national pantheon during the Middle Kingdom reflected both political necessities and genuine religious developments, as reunified Egypt sought to accommodate the diverse religious traditions that had flourished during the first intermediate period. Regional deities who had gained prominence during the period of political fragmentation were incorporated into national religious systems through theological syncretism that identified local gods with major national deities, or assigned them specialized roles within expanded pantheons. This process created a more complex but also more inclusive religious system that acknowledged regional diversity while maintaining national religious unity. The gradual weakening of Middle Kingdom central authority during the later 13th dynasty created conditions that enabled foreign populations to establish independent rule over substantial portions of Egypt for the first time in the nation's recorded history. Archaeological evidence from Tel el-Dabar, the ancient city of Avaris in the eastern delta, reveals a steady increase in Asiatic material culture and burial practices throughout the late Middle Kingdom, indicating significant immigration from the Levant that initially occurred through peaceful settlement rather than military conquest. These Asiatic immigrants, who would later be known to Egyptian sources as the Hyksos, brought with them advanced military technologies, administrative practices, and cultural traditions that would profoundly influence Egyptian civilization even after their eventual expulsion. The transformation of these immigrant communities from peaceful settlers into rulers of Lower Egypt occurred gradually as weakening pharaonic authority created power vacuums that ambitious local leaders could exploit. The process appears to have begun with Asiatic chieftains establishing control over individual delta towns and their surrounding agricultural territories, then expanding their influence through military conquest and diplomatic alliance, until they controlled most of Lower Egypt from their capital at Avaris. Contemporary Egyptian sources from Upper Egypt describe this process in terms of foreign invasion and conquest, but archaeological evidence suggests a more complex transformation involving the gradual assumption of pharaonic titles and administrative structures by leaders who had already established de facto control over substantial territories. The military superiority that enabled Hyksos expansion throughout Lower Egypt stemmed primarily from their introduction of horse-drawn chariots, a revolutionary military technology that provided unprecedented tactical mobility and psychological impact on the battlefield. These two-wheeled vehicles, constructed with lightweight wooden frames and spoked wheels, could carry a driver and archer at speeds approaching 40 km per hour across suitable terrain, allowing rapid deployment of forces and quick withdrawal from disadvantageous positions. The horses that pulled these chariots, probably introduced to Egypt from the Syrian region, where they had been domesticated for several centuries, required specialized knowledge of breeding, training and veterinary care that Asiatic immigrants possessed, but Egyptians had to learn through direct contact with Hyksos military forces. Chariot warfare demanded fundamental changes in military organization and tactical thinking that extended far beyond the simple adoption of new equipment. Effective chariot operations required coordinated training of drivers, archers, and horses working as integrated teams, along with support personnel responsible for vehicle maintenance, horse care, and the production of specialized equipment, including harnesses, bridles, and chariot components. The social implications of chariot warfare were equally significant, as the expense of maintaining horses and chariots created a military elite whose status derived from their mastery of this expensive technology rather than traditional Egyptian concepts of hereditary nobility or administrative competence. The composite bow represented another crucial military innovation introduced by the Hyksos that revolutionized Egyptian archery capabilities and influenced military tactics throughout the remainder of pharaonic history. These weapons, constructed from laminated strips of wood, horn, and sinew bound together with animal glue, could generate significantly greater range and penetrating power than the simple wooden bows traditionally used by Egyptian archers. The manufacturing process for composite bows required specialized knowledge of material selection, adhesive preparation, and assembly techniques that had been developed over centuries in the pastoral societies of the Levant and Central Asia, where mounted archery and mobile warfare had created demand for powerful, compact weapons suitable for use from horseback or chariots. Bronze weaponry introduced by the Hyksos provided Egyptian warriors with superior cutting and thrusting weapons that maintained sharp edges longer than traditional copper implements, while offering greater durability and penetrating power against enemy armor and shields. The production of bronze weapons required access to tin, a relatively rare metal that had to be imported from distant sources in Anatolia or Central Asia, along with sophisticated metallurgical knowledge for achieving proper alloy compositions and heat treatment procedures. Hyksos' control over international trade networks connecting Egypt with the broader Near Eastern world enabled them to maintain reliable supplies of tin and other strategic materials while developing the technological expertise necessary for large-scale bronze production. The administrative systems developed by Hyksos rulers in Lower Egypt combined traditional Egyptian governmental structures with Asiatic administrative practices, creating hybrid institutions that reflected the multicultural character of their kingdom. Scarab seals bearing Hyksos royal names follow Egyptian artistic conventions, while incorporating Asiatic personal names and titles, indicating conscious efforts to legitimize foreign rule through adoption of pharaonic symbols and ceremonial practices. Administrative documents from Hyksos-controlled territories reveal continued use of Egyptian hieroglyphic writing alongside cuneiform texts that connected the Delta Kingdom with diplomatic and commercial networks extending throughout the ancient Near East. The capital city of Avaris grew into one of the largest urban centers in the ancient world under Hyksos rule, with archaeological excavations revealing a cosmopolitan population that included Egyptians, Canaanites, Cypriots, and other Mediterranean peoples engaged in extensive international trade. The city's harbour facilities accommodated seagoing vessels from throughout the eastern Mediterranean, while overland trade routes connected Avaris with caravan networks extending into Mesopotamia and Anatolia. This international commercial activity brought unprecedented wealth to the Delta region, while introducing Egyptian craftsmen and merchants to foreign techniques, materials, and artistic styles that would influence Egyptian culture long after the restoration of native rule. Religious practices in Hyksos-controlled territories reflected the syncretic blending of Egyptian and Asiatic traditions that characterized this period of foreign rule. The Hyksos patron deity Seth, traditionally associated with chaos and foreign lands in Egyptian mythology, was reinterpreted as a powerful storm god similar to the Canaanite Baal, while maintaining his traditional Egyptian iconography and mythological associations. This theological adaptation allowed Hyksos rulers to claim legitimacy within Egyptian religious frameworks, while maintaining connections to their ancestral religious traditions. Egyptian deities continued to receive worship in Hyksos territories, but often in modified forms that incorporated Asiatic ritual practices and theological concepts. Archaeological evidence from Hyksos period temples reveals architectural innovations that combined Egyptian building techniques with Asiatic design elements, creating distinctive religious structures that influenced subsequent Egyptian temple architecture. The temple complex at Tel el-Daba featured courtyards surrounded by colonnades with painted columns depicting lotus and papyrus motifs, but incorporated Asiatic-style altars and ritual installations not found in traditional Egyptian religious architecture. Wall paintings in these temples combined Egyptian artistic conventions with Asiatic subject matter, including scenes of foreign tribute bearers and exotic animals that reflected the international character of Hyksos rule. Meanwhile, in Upper Egypt, the Theban 17th dynasty maintained independent Egyptian rule over the southern provinces, while gradually developing the military capabilities necessary to challenge Hyksos dominance in the north. The early 17th dynasty pharaohs controlled a territory extending from Elephantine in the south to Asyut in the north, encompassing the most productive agricultural regions of Upper Egypt, along with access to Nubian gold mines that provided the economic foundation for their eventual liberation campaigns. These rulers faced the complex challenge of maintaining traditional Egyptian governmental and religious institutions while adapting to the military innovations that had enabled Hyksos' success in Lower Egypt. The process of military modernization in Upper Egypt involved the systematic adoption of Hyksos military technologies and tactical innovations, while maintaining distinctly Egyptian military organization and command structures. Theban rulers recruited foreign military advisors, probably Nubian warriors familiar with Near Eastern military practices, to train Egyptian forces in chariot warfare and the effective use of composite bows and bronze weapons. This military transformation required substantial economic investment in horse breeding programs, chariot manufacturing workshops, and bronze production facilities that strained the resources of the Theban kingdom while preparing for the eventual confrontation with Hyksos forces. The cultural exchange between Egyptian and foreign populations during the Second Intermediate Period extended far beyond military technology to encompass artistic styles, craft techniques, and intellectual traditions that enriched Egyptian civilization while maintaining its distinctive character. Pottery production in Upper Egypt incorporated decorative motifs and vessel forms derived from Asiatic ceramic traditions, while maintaining traditional Egyptian manufacturing techniques and functional requirements. Jewellery and decorative arts from this period reveal sophisticated understanding of foreign artistic conventions combined with distinctly Egyptian aesthetic preferences and symbolic meanings. Textile production during the Second Intermediate Period benefited from the introduction of new fibres, dyes and weaving techniques that expanded the range of fabrics available to Egyptian consumers while creating new opportunities for craft specialization and international trade. Woolen textiles, previously rare in Egypt's linen-dominated textile industry, became more common as foreign populations introduced sheep breeds adapted to Egyptian climate conditions and weaving techniques suitable for wool processing. New dyeing techniques using imported materials created previously unavailable colours and patterns that influenced Egyptian decorative arts and social distinctions based on access to luxury textiles. The gradual military build-up in Upper Egypt culminated in the reign of Kamose, the last pharaoh of the 17th dynasty, who initiated direct military confrontation with the Hyksos kingdom after decades of uneasy coexistence and limited border conflicts. Kamose's military campaigns, documented in contemporary inscriptions from Karnak Temple and his tomb at Thebes, reveal sophisticated strategic planning that combined traditional Egyptian military strengths with newly acquired technological capabilities. The pharaoh's forces utilized river transport to achieve tactical surprise, while employing chariot units and composite bow archery to match Hyksos military capabilities in direct combat. The first major engagement between Kamose's forces and the Hyksos army occurred near Nefrusi, approximately 30 kilometers south of Memphis, where Egyptian forces achieved a significant tactical victory that demonstrated their successful adaptation of foreign military technologies. Contemporary accounts describe Egyptian chariots operating effectively against Hyksos forces, while Egyptian archers using composite bows provided supporting fire that disrupted enemy formations. This victory enabled Kamose to advance northward toward Memphis, while capturing several fortified towns that had served as Hyksos strongholds in Middle Egypt. Kamose's northern campaign extended Egyptian control to the outskirts of Memphis, while establishing naval supremacy over the crucial stretch of the Nile connecting Upper and Lower Egypt. Egyptian naval forces, equipped with new ship designs that incorporated foreign innovations in sail configuration and steering systems, successfully engaged Hyksos river fleets while interdicting commercial traffic that had sustained the Delta Kingdom's economy. These naval operations required sophisticated coordination between land and river forces, demonstrating the administrative and logistical capabilities that would prove crucial for the successful completion of the liberation wars. The diplomatic dimensions of Kamose's conflict with the Hyksos involved complex negotiations with Nubian kingdoms to the south, whose support was essential for securing Upper Egypt's southern frontier while concentrating military resources for northern campaigns. Intercepted correspondence between the Hyksos ruler Apophis and Nubian leaders reveals attempts to coordinate anti-Theban military action that would have created a strategic encirclement of Upper Egypt. Kamose's successful prevention of this alliance through diplomatic negotiation and military pressure against Nubian territories demonstrated sophisticated understanding of regional power dynamics and strategic planning. The death of Kamose before the completion of his liberation campaigns left the final expulsion of the Hyksos to his successor, Ahmose I, who would establish the 18th dynasty and inaugurate the New Kingdom period of Egyptian history. Ahmose's military campaigns built upon the foundation established by Kamose, while introducing additional innovations in siege warfare and strategic coordination that proved decisive in overcoming Hyksos resistance. The systematic reduction of Hyksos strongholds throughout the delta required sustained military operations over several years, demonstrating the organizational capabilities and resource mobilization that would characterize New Kingdom military operations. The Siege of Avaris represented the climactic engagement of the Liberation Wars, involving sophisticated siege techniques that combined traditional Egyptian military methods with innovations learned through contact with Near Eastern military traditions. Egyptian forces constructed elaborate siege works, including earthen ramps, battering rams, and protective mantlets, that enabled systematic reduction of the city's fortifications while minimizing casualties among attacking forces. The successful capture of the Hyksos capital after an extended siege demonstrated Egyptian mastery of complex military operations, while providing access to the technological knowledge and international connections that had sustained foreign rule in Lower Egypt. The final pursuit of retreating Hyksos forces into Palestine extended Egyptian military operations beyond traditional boundaries, while establishing diplomatic and military relationships that would influence New Kingdom foreign policy for centuries. Ahmos's siege of Sharuhen, a fortified city in southern Palestine where Hyksos refugees had established a stronghold, required 3 years of sustained operations that demonstrated Egyptian commitment to preventing any future Hyksos resurgence. These extended military campaigns in foreign territory required sophisticated logistical support and diplomatic arrangements with local populations that provided Egyptian commanders with valuable experience in international military operations. The successful completion of the liberation wars under Ahmos I restored native Egyptian rule throughout the Nile Valley, while fundamentally transforming Egyptian military capabilities, administrative structures, and international relationships. The military technologies and tactical innovations introduced during the Hyksos period became permanent elements of Egyptian military organization, while the administrative techniques developed for governing diverse populations influenced New Kingdom governmental structures. The international connections established through contact with Hyksos trade networks provided Egypt with access to foreign markets and diplomatic relationships that would support the territorial, expansion, and cultural achievements of the New Kingdom period. The expulsion of the Hyksos under Ahmos I marked the beginning of Egypt's transformation from a regional power focused on maintaining internal stability into an aggressive imperial state, determined to prevent future foreign domination through preemptive conquest and territorial expansion. The traumatic experience of foreign rule had fundamentally altered Egyptian strategic thinking, as the new 18th dynasty pharaohs recognized that Egypt's traditional policy of defensive isolation was no longer adequate for protecting the kingdom against increasingly sophisticated and militarily advanced neighbors. The military technologies and organizational innovations acquired during the liberation wars provided Egyptian commanders with the capabilities necessary for sustained offensive operations beyond Egypt's traditional boundaries, while the wealth accumulated through territorial conquest would finance the most ambitious architectural and artistic projects in Egyptian history. Ahmos I's immediate successors, Amenhotep I and Thutmose I, systematically expanded Egyptian military operations southward into Nubia and northward into the Levant, establishing the territorial foundations of Egypt's New Kingdom empire through coordinated campaigns that demonstrated unprecedented strategic vision and logistical sophistication. Thutmose I's Nubian campaigns extended Egyptian control beyond the Third Cataract for the first time, establishing fortified administrative centres at Tombos and other strategic locations that enabled systematic exploitation of gold deposits in the Dongola Reach, while securing Egypt's southern frontier against potential threats from the emerging Kingdom of Kush. These operations required the construction of specialized river vessels capable of navigating the treacherous waters of the cataracts, along with supply systems that could sustain large military forces operating hundreds of kilometers from Egyptian population centers. The logistical challenges of Nubian campaigning pushed Egyptian administrative capabilities to new levels of sophistication, as military operations in the harsh desert environments south of the Third Cataract required careful coordination of food supplies, water sources, and medical support for forces operating far from traditional supply bases. Royal inscriptions from Tombos describe the construction of wells and supply depots at strategic intervals along the Nile, while specialized military units were trained in desert warfare and the particular challenges of operating in Nubia's extreme climate. The successful establishment of permanent Egyptian control over Lower Nubia provided access to gold resources that would finance the military expansion and monumental construction projects that characterized the remainder of the New Kingdom period. Thutmose III's northern campaigns into the Levant represented an even more dramatic departure from traditional Egyptian foreign policy, as these operations involved sustained military action in regions where Egypt had previously maintained only commercial and diplomatic relationships. The pharaoh's forces advanced through Palestine into Syria, engaging the sophisticated military forces of city-states that possessed advanced fortification systems, professional armies, and international diplomatic connections that could provide military assistance against Egyptian expansion. The successful capture of several Syrian cities and the establishment of Egyptian garrisons at strategic locations demonstrated that Egyptian military capabilities now rivaled those of any contemporary power in the ancient Near East. The military innovations that enabled these territorial conquests extended far beyond the adoption of Hyksos military technologies to encompass fundamental reorganization of Egyptian military institutions and the development of new strategic doctrines adapted to imperial requirements. The traditional Egyptian military structure, based on temporary conscription of peasant farmers during the agricultural off-season, proved inadequate for the sustained campaigning required to conquer and hold distant territories. Professional military units, recruited from Egyptian and foreign volunteers and maintained as permanent forces with regular pay and equipment, became the backbone of New Kingdom armies, while specialized support services including military engineering, medical corps and intelligence gathering developed into sophisticated military institutions. The reign of Thutmose III witnessed the full maturation of Egyptian imperial military capabilities through 17 major campaigns that established Egyptian hegemony over the Levant while demonstrating strategic and tactical innovations that influenced military thinking throughout the ancient Near East. The Battle of Megiddo in the pharaoh's 22nd regnal year represented the decisive engagement that established Egyptian dominance over the Canaanite city-states, involving sophisticated strategic planning that combined surprise attack, tactical flexibility, and psychological warfare to achieve overwhelming victory against a coalition of enemy forces that significantly outnumbered the Egyptian army. Thutmose III's approach to the Megiddo campaign demonstrated revolutionary strategic thinking that abandoned traditional Egyptian preferences for predictable, methodical military operations in favour of bold tactical innovations designed to achieve maximum psychological impact while minimising Egyptian casualties. The pharaoh's decision to advance his army through the narrow and easily defended Aruna Pass, despite the availability of safer alternative routes, caught the enemy coalition completely unprepared and enabled Egyptian forces to deploy on the plain of Esdraelon before their opponents could organise effective resistance. This strategic surprise, combined with the superior training and equipment of Egyptian professional forces, resulted in a complete tactical victory that shattered the anti-Egyptian coalition and established Egyptian control over central Palestine. The Siege of Megiddo itself revealed Egyptian mastery of sophisticated siege warfare techniques that combined traditional methods with innovative approaches adapted to the specific challenges of reducing heavily fortified urban centres. Egyptian engineers constructed elaborate siege works, including earthen ramps that enabled attacking forces to reach the height of the city walls, while specialised siege equipment, including battering rams and scaling ladders, facilitated direct assault on defensive positions. The 7-month duration of the siege demonstrated Egyptian logistical capabilities and strategic patience, as the besieging forces maintained effective encirclement while preventing any relief attempts by enemy forces operating in the surrounding region. The systematic exploitation of victory at Megiddo established patterns of imperial administration that would characterise Egyptian rule over the Levant throughout the New Kingdom period. Rather than attempting direct administrative control over conquered territories, Egyptian policy emphasised the installation of loyal local rulers who acknowledged pharaonic suzerainty, while maintaining traditional governmental structures adapted to Egyptian requirements. This indirect rule system minimised administrative costs while maximising economic benefits, as tribute payments from vassal states provided substantial revenues without requiring extensive Egyptian bureaucratic presence in distant territories. The tribute system established by Thutmose III created unprecedented wealth flows into Egypt that financed the monumental construction projects and artistic achievements that defined New Kingdom civilization. Annual tribute payments from Levantine city-states included precious metals, exotic woods, manufactured goods, and luxury items that enhanced royal prestige while providing Egyptian craftsmen with access to foreign materials and techniques. Nubian tribute, consisting primarily of gold, ivory, exotic animals, and enslaved persons, provided the pharaoh with resources for rewarding loyal officials and financing military operations, while demonstrating Egypt's imperial power to domestic and foreign audiences. The administrative challenges of governing a territorial empire extending from Nubia to the Euphrates River required fundamental innovations in Egyptian governmental structures and the development of new bureaucratic specializations adapted to imperial requirements. The office of Viceroy of Nubia, established during the early 18th dynasty, assumed responsibility for all aspects of Egyptian administration in the southern territories while reporting directly to the pharaoh and maintaining independent military forces capable of suppressing local rebellions. This position required individuals with exceptional administrative abilities and military experience, as the viceroy had to coordinate mining operations, tribute collection, temple construction, and diplomatic relationships with indigenous Nubian populations, while maintaining security along Egypt's extended southern frontier. Similarly, the administration of Egyptian interests in the Levant required the development of new diplomatic and military institutions capable of managing complex relationships with vassal states, monitoring potential threats from major powers like Mitanni and the Hittite Empire, and coordinating military interventions when local situations threatened Egyptian interests. Egyptian resident officials in major Levantine cities served dual functions as diplomatic representatives and intelligence gatherers, maintaining detailed reports on local political developments while coordinating with Egyptian military commanders when intervention became necessary. The revolutionary reign of Amenhotep IV, who adopted the name Akhenaten around his 5th regnal year, represented the most dramatic religious and cultural transformation in Egyptian history, as the pharaoh attempted to replace Egypt's traditional polytheistic religious system with exclusive worship of the solar disk Aten. This religious revolution extended far beyond theological innovation to encompass fundamental changes in royal ideology, artistic expression, and administrative organization that challenged the basic assumptions underlying Egyptian civilization for over a millennium. The establishment of a new capital city at Akhetaten, modern Tel El Amarna, provided a physical manifestation of the pharaoh's religious vision, while creating opportunities for architectural and artistic experimentation unencumbered by traditional conventions and established religious institutions. The theological foundations of Atenism represented a radical departure from traditional Egyptian religious thought, as Akhenaten proclaimed the Aten as the sole creator deity while explicitly rejecting the existence and worship of other gods. This monotheistic innovation eliminated the complex theological relationships between different deities that had characterized Egyptian religion since the pre-dynastic period, replacing the traditional pantheon with a simplified religious system focused exclusively on the life-giving power of solar radiation. The famous hymn to the Aten, probably composed by Akhenaten himself, presents sophisticated theological arguments for monotheism while celebrating the Aten's role as universal creator and sustainer of all life on Earth. The artistic revolution accompanying religious reform at Amarna produced the most distinctive and recognizable art style in Egyptian history, characterized by unprecedented naturalism in royal portraiture and innovative approaches to representing the human form that abandoned the idealized conventions of traditional Egyptian art. Akhenaten's portraits reveal physical characteristics, including an elongated skull, narrow shoulders, pronounced hips, and distinctive facial features that may represent actual physical appearance or symbolic representation of religious transformation. The inclusion of intimate family scenes showing the royal family and casual affectionate interactions represented a complete departure from the formal ceremonial imagery that had dominated Egyptian royal art since the early dynastic period. The construction of Akhetaten required massive mobilization of resources and personnel, as thousands of workers laboured to create an entirely new city within the span of a few years. The city's layout reflected Akhenaten's religious vision, with the Great Temple of the Aten serving as the central focus of urban planning, while residential districts were arranged according to social hierarchy and functional requirements. The royal palace complex, covering several hectares and incorporating innovative architectural features, including extensive use of painted decoration and open courtyards designed to maximize exposure to sunlight, demonstrated the wealth and artistic sophistication of the Amarna court, while providing venues for the elaborate ceremonies that celebrated Atenist religious practices. The international implications of the Amarna period proved disastrous for Egyptian imperial interests, as Akhenaten's preoccupation with religious reform distracted attention from the diplomatic and military requirements of maintaining imperial control over distant territories. The Amarna letters, a diplomatic archive discovered at Tel el Amarna, containing correspondence between the Egyptian court and rulers throughout the Near East, reveal the gradual collapse of Egyptian influence in the Levant as local rulers appealed unsuccessfully for military assistance against expanding Hittite power and internal rebellions. The pharaoh's failure to respond effectively to these crises resulted in the loss of substantial territories that had been conquered and held by his predecessors, while encouraging further challenges to Egyptian authority throughout the empire. The reign of Tutankhamun, though brief and occurring during his minority under the guidance of powerful advisors including the general Horemheb, witnessed systematic restoration of traditional religious practices and the abandonment of Akhetaten in favour of the ancient capitals at Memphis and Thebes. This restoration process involved not only the physical destruction of Atentenist temples and monuments, but also deliberate efforts to erase Akhenaten's memory from official records while re-establishing the traditional religious institutions that had been suppressed during the Amarna period. The famous treasures from Tutankhamun's tomb, discovered virtually intact by Howard Carter in 1922, demonstrate the extraordinary wealth and artistic sophistication of the restored traditional court, while providing insights into the religious beliefs and funerary practices of the late 18th dynasty. The military campaigns of Horemheb and the early 19th dynasty pharaohs Ramesses I and Seti I represented systematic efforts to restore Egyptian imperial power after the losses sustained during the Amarna period. Seti I's military operations in Palestine and Syria re-established Egyptian control over key strategic locations, while demonstrating that Egypt remained capable of projecting military power throughout the Levant despite the setbacks of the previous generation. The pharaoh's campaigns utilized improved military technologies including iron weapons and more sophisticated siege equipment, while maintaining the professional military organization that had enabled earlier New Kingdom conquests. The reign of Ramesses II represented the climax of New Kingdom imperial power and cultural achievement, as the pharaoh's 67-year rule provided unprecedented opportunities for monumental construction, territorial expansion, and diplomatic innovation that established Egypt as the dominant power in the ancient Near East. The early years of Ramesses II's reign were dominated by military confrontation with the Hittite Empire, culminating in the famous Battle of Kadesh that, despite Egyptian claims of victory, actually resulted in strategic stalemate that led both powers to recognize the futility of continued warfare and the advantages of diplomatic cooperation. The Battle of Kadesh itself represented one of the largest military engagements of the ancient world, involving over 40,000 soldiers and hundreds of chariots in a complex tactical encounter that demonstrated both the capabilities and limitations of late Bronze Age military technology. Ramesses II's personal account of the battle, carved on temple walls throughout Egypt, describes the pharaoh's heroic individual combat against overwhelming enemy forces while his army fled in panic, though Hittite sources suggest a more complex tactical situation in which both sides suffered substantial casualties without achieving decisive victory. The battle's strategic outcome forced both empires to acknowledge that continued warfare was economically unsustainable and strategically counterproductive, leading to diplomatic negotiations that would produce the ancient world's first recorded peace treaty. The Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty, concluded in Ramesses II's 21st regnal year, established principles of international law and diplomatic cooperation that influenced subsequent diplomatic practice throughout the ancient Near East. The treaty's provisions included mutual defense agreements, extradition arrangements for political refugees, and detailed protocols for diplomatic communication that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of international relations and legal principles. The successful implementation of this treaty created a stable international environment that enabled both empires to focus resources on internal development and cultural achievement while maintaining peaceful relationships that lasted for the remainder of both dynasties. The death of Ramesses I around 1077 BC marked the end of the new kingdom's centralized pharaonic authority and initiated a complex period of political fragmentation that would fundamentally reshape Egyptian civilization for over 4 centuries. Unlike the dramatic collapse that had characterized the end of the Old Kingdom, the transition into the Third Intermediate Period occurred through a gradual erosion of royal power as competing institutions and regional leaders systematically undermined central authority while maintaining the fiction of unified pharaonic rule. The high priest of Amun at Thebes, Herihor, had already assumed royal prerogatives during Ramesses II's lifetime, issuing decrees in his own name and dating documents according to his own regnal years while nominally acknowledging pharaonic supremacy. This unprecedented assumption of royal authority by a religious official established a pattern of institutional competition that would characterize Egyptian politics throughout the Third Intermediate Period. The emergence of the high priests of Amun as independent rulers in Upper Egypt reflected the enormous wealth and administrative power that had accumulated in Theban religious institutions during the New Kingdom period. The Temple of Amun at Karnak controlled vast agricultural estates throughout Upper Egypt, operated gold mines in Nubia, and maintained its own military forces recruited from Nubian mercenaries and Egyptian veterans of imperial campaigns. The high priest's administrative apparatus rivaled that of the pharaoh himself, with specialized departments responsible for temple construction, agricultural management, foreign trade, and diplomatic relationships with Nubian rulers. This institutional independence enabled Theban religious authorities to maintain effective governance over Upper Egypt, even as pharaonic authority collapsed in the north. Simultaneously, in the Delta region, a new royal dynasty established itself at Tanis under Smendes I, who claimed legitimacy as successor to the Ramesside pharaohs while exercising actual authority over only the northern provinces of Egypt. The 21st dynasty rulers at Tanis maintained traditional pharaonic ceremonial and administrative structures, constructing elaborate royal tombs and temples that demonstrated their commitment to preserving Egyptian cultural traditions despite their limited territorial control. Archaeological excavations at Tanis have revealed royal burials containing magnificent gold and silver grave goods that rival those of New Kingdom pharaohs, indicating that the northern rulers retained access to substantial wealth despite the political fragmentation affecting the rest of Egypt. The division of Egypt between Tanite pharaohs in the north and Theban high priests in the south created an unprecedented situation in which 2 separate institutions claimed supreme authority over different portions of the kingdom, while maintaining diplomatic relationships that acknowledged their mutual independence. Marriage alliances between the royal families of Tanis and the hereditary high priests of Thebes formalized this division, while preventing open military conflict that might have further weakened both regions. These diplomatic arrangements enabled each authority to focus on governing its own territory, while maintaining the theoretical unity of Egypt through ceremonial cooperation and shared participation in major religious festivals. The peaceful coexistence between northern and southern authorities during the early 21st dynasty gradually gave way to more complex political arrangements as local governors and military commanders throughout Egypt began asserting greater independence from both Tanis and Thebes. Provincial officials who had maintained nominal loyalty to central authorities during the late New Kingdom increasingly treated their positions as hereditary possessions, establishing local dynasties that controlled individual nomes or groups of related territories. These regional power centres maintained traditional Egyptian administrative and religious practices while developing distinctive local characteristics that reflected their particular geographic and economic circumstances. The infiltration of Libyan populations into the Western Delta during the late New Kingdom period created additional complications for Egyptian political stability, as these immigrant communities gradually integrated into Egyptian society while maintaining distinct cultural identities and military traditions. Unlike the Hyksos invasion that had involved the conquest of existing Egyptian territories, Libyan settlement occurred primarily in previously marginal areas of the Western Delta, where Egyptian administrative control had always been limited. These Libyan communities initially served as military allies of Egyptian authorities, providing warriors for royal armies in exchange for settlement rights and integration into Egyptian administrative systems. The military capabilities of Libyan immigrants derived from their pastoral background and tribal organization, which had produced experienced warriors accustomed to mobile warfare and livestock raiding in the harsh desert environment west of the Nile Valley. Libyan military units utilized distinctive weapons, including curved swords, javelins, and composite bows, while their tactical preferences emphasize rapid movement and surprise attacks rather than the formal battlefield engagements favored by traditional Egyptian military doctrine. The integration of these military techniques into Egyptian armies provided pharaonic forces with enhanced capabilities for desert warfare while creating new opportunities for ambitious Libyan commanders to advance within Egyptian military hierarchies. Shoshenq I, founder of the 22nd dynasty around 945 BC, represented the culmination of this gradual Libyan integration into Egyptian political structures, as he successfully claimed pharaonic authority while maintaining his connections to Libyan tribal networks that provided the military support necessary for establishing a new royal dynasty. Unlike foreign conquerors who had imposed alien governmental systems on Egypt, Shoshenq adopted traditional pharaonic titles and ceremonial practices while introducing administrative innovations that reflected his Libyan background and the changed political circumstances of the Third Intermediate Period. His establishment of royal residence at Bubastis in the Eastern Delta, rather than the traditional capitals of Memphis or Thebes, symbolized the new dynasty's independence from established Egyptian political centers while maintaining access to the agricultural wealth and commercial networks of the Delta region. The military campaigns of Shoshenq I demonstrated that the Libyan dynasty retained sufficient resources and organizational capabilities to project Egyptian power beyond the kingdom's traditional boundaries, as evidenced by his successful invasion of Palestine around 925 BC that re-established Egyptian influence in the Levant for the first time since the collapse of the New Kingdom Empire. This campaign, recorded in both Egyptian temple inscriptions and biblical sources, involved coordinated military operations against the kingdoms of Israel and Judah that resulted in substantial tribute payments and the capture of numerous fortified cities including Jerusalem. The success of these operations indicated that Egypt remained capable of significant military achievements despite the political fragmentation that had characterized the early Third Intermediate period. The administrative policies of the 22nd dynasty reflected conscious efforts to balance the maintenance of traditional Egyptian governmental structures with the practical requirements of managing a politically fragmented kingdom that included numerous semi-independent regional authorities. Shoshenqawad and his successors appointed family members and loyal supporters to key administrative positions throughout Egypt, creating a network of personal relationships that supplemented traditional bureaucratic hierarchies while ensuring loyalty to the new dynasty. This system enabled the Libyan pharaohs to maintain effective control over crucial economic resources including agricultural estates, commercial networks, and religious institutions, while allowing regional authorities to retain significant autonomy in local administrative matters. The religious policies of the Libyan dynasty demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the central role that traditional Egyptian religious institutions played in legitimizing political authority and maintaining social stability. Rather than attempting to impose foreign religious practices or challenge established theological systems, the 22nd dynasty pharaohs presented themselves as devoted servants of traditional Egyptian deities while making substantial investments in temple construction and religious ceremonies that enhanced their legitimacy among Egyptian populations. The famous Bubastit portal at Karnak Temple, constructed by Shoshenq I to commemorate his Palestinian campaign, utilized traditional Egyptian artistic conventions and religious iconography while celebrating military achievements that enhanced royal prestige and demonstrated divine favor. The gradual weakening of 22nd dynasty authority during the 8th century BC created opportunities for additional regional powers to assert independence while maintaining nominal acknowledgement of pharaonic supremacy. The emergence of the 23rd dynasty at Leontopolis represented one such development, as local rulers in the central delta established their own royal line while claiming equal legitimacy with the Bubastite pharaohs. This multiplication of competing royal dynasties created increasingly complex political situations in which multiple individuals simultaneously claimed pharaonic titles while exercising actual authority over limited territories, leading to diplomatic and military conflicts that further weakened Egyptian unity. The 24th dynasty, established by Tefnakht at Sais in the western delta around 727 BC, represented yet another attempt by regional authorities to claim pharaonic legitimacy while building coalitions capable of challenging the established Libyan dynasties. Tefnakht's political program involved the systematic conquest of neighbouring territories through military campaigns that combined traditional Egyptian siege warfare with innovative tactical approaches adapted from contemporary Near Eastern military practices. His temporary success in unifying much of Lower Egypt under Site authority demonstrated that ambitious regional leaders could still mobilize sufficient resources for significant territorial expansion despite the overall weakness of central authority. The rise of Nubian power during the 8th century BC fundamentally altered the political balance within Egypt as the rulers of Kush, based at Napata near the Fourth Cataract, developed the military and administrative capabilities necessary for large-scale intervention in Egyptian affairs. The Kingdom of Kush had emerged during the New Kingdom period, as Egyptian colonial administration in Nubia gradually evolved into an independent state that maintained Egyptian cultural and religious traditions while developing distinctive Nubian characteristics. Kushite rulers adopted Egyptian royal titles and religious practices, constructed pyramid tombs similar to those of Egyptian pharaohs, and maintained temples dedicated to Egyptian deities while governing through administrative systems derived from Egyptian colonial precedents. Pia's invasion of Egypt around 747 BC represented the most significant foreign military intervention in Egyptian affairs since the Hyksos period, involving coordinated campaigns that systematically reduced Egyptian resistance while demonstrating superior military organization and strategic planning. Unlike previous foreign conquerors who had sought to impose alien governmental systems on Egypt, Pir presented his invasion as a religious crusade designed to restore proper worship of Amun and eliminate the corruption that had infected Egyptian religious institutions during the period of political fragmentation. This ideological framework enabled the Nubian king to claim legitimacy among Egyptian populations, while justifying military action against established authorities. The military capabilities that enabled Pir's successful conquest of Egypt reflected centuries of military development within the Kingdom of Kush, as Nubian rulers had maintained professional armies equipped with iron weapons and trained in the siege warfare techniques necessary for reducing fortified cities. Kushite military organization combined traditional Nubian strengths in archery and desert warfare with administrative and logistical system derived from Egyptian military practices, creating hybrid institutions that proved superior to the fragmented forces available to competing Egyptian dynasties. The systematic nature of Pir's campaigns, involving coordinated river and overland operations that isolated enemy strongholds while preventing effective coordination of resistance, demonstrated strategic sophistication that surpassed contemporary Egyptian military capabilities. The religious dimensions of Pir's conquest reflected genuine devotion to traditional Egyptian religious practices, combined with shrewd political calculation about the ideological foundations necessary for legitimizing foreign rule over Egyptian populations. Pir's inscriptions emphasize his role as a devoted servant of Amun, who had been commanded by the god to restore proper religious observances and eliminate the sacrilege that had corrupted Egyptian temples during the period of political chaos. This religious justification enabled the Nubian king to present his conquest as divine intervention rather than foreign invasion, while appealing to Egyptian religious sentiments that had been offended by the perceived neglect of traditional ceremonial obligations by competing dynasties. The establishment of the 25th dynasty under Pir and his successors created the paradoxical situation in which foreign rulers from Nubia became the most effective defenders of traditional Egyptian cultural and religious practices against the innovations and adaptations that had characterized the Third Intermediate Period. Kushite pharaohs invested enormous resources in temple restoration and construction projects throughout Egypt, reviving architectural and artistic traditions that had declined during the period of political fragmentation, while introducing Nubian elements that enriched Egyptian cultural expression. The pyramid complexes constructed by 25th dynasty rulers at Nuri and Kuru in Nubia represented the most ambitious royal burial projects undertaken since the New Kingdom period, demonstrating the dynasty's commitment to maintaining pharaonic traditions while adapting them to Nubian circumstances. The administrative policies of the Kushite pharaohs reflected sophisticated understanding of the challenges involved in governing a territory that extended from the Sixth Cataract in Nubia to the Mediterranean coast in Egypt, requiring coordination of diverse populations with different cultural traditions and economic systems. The 25th dynasty maintained traditional Egyptian administrative structures while introducing Nubian officials into key positions, creating hybrid governmental institutions that combined the administrative expertise of Egyptian bureaucrats with the military capabilities and political loyalty of Nubian supporters. This system enabled effective governance of both Egypt and Nubia, while maintaining the cultural distinctiveness of each region within the unified kingdom. The growing threat of Assyrian expansion into the Levant during the late 8th century BC created external pressures that would ultimately prove decisive in ending the 25th dynasty's rule over Egypt. Assyrian military campaigns under Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon II had systematically conquered the independent kingdoms of Syria and Palestine, creating a powerful imperial state on Egypt's northeastern border that possessed the military capabilities and strategic ambitions necessary for direct intervention in Egyptian affairs. The Kushite pharaohs' support for anti-Assyrian coalitions in Palestine brought them into direct conflict with Assyrian imperial interests, while providing justification for Assyrian military action against Egypt itself. Esarhaddon's invasion of Egypt in 674 BC represented the beginning of sustained Assyrian military pressure that would eventually force the withdrawal of Kushite authority from Egypt and establish Assyrian hegemony over the Delta region. The initial Assyrian campaign, though unsuccessful in achieving permanent conquest, demonstrated that even the restored military capabilities of the 25th dynasty were insufficient to resist the professional armies and sophisticated siege equipment that Assyria could deploy against Egyptian strongholds. The systematic nature of Assyrian military operations, involving coordinated attacks on multiple targets while maintaining secure supply lines across the Sinai Peninsula, revealed strategic and logistical capabilities that surpassed those available to any contemporary Egyptian authority. The successful Assyrian conquest of Memphis in 671 BC under Esarhaddon marked a decisive turning point in Egyptian political development, as foreign military occupation forced the Kushite pharaoh Taharqa to withdraw southward, while Assyrian administrators assumed direct control over Lower Egypt. Unlike previous foreign conquests that had involved the replacement of one royal dynasty with another, Assyrian rule represented the imposition of an entirely alien administrative system that treated Egypt as a conquered province within a larger imperial structure. This fundamental change in Egypt's political status created unprecedented challenges for maintaining traditional cultural and religious institutions, while adapting to the demands of foreign imperial administration. The expulsion of Assyrian forces from Egypt around 664 BC under Psamtik was mark the beginning of an extraordinary cultural and political renaissance that would restore native Egyptian rule while fundamentally transforming the kingdom's relationship with the broader Mediterranean world. Psamtik I, initially installed as an Assyrian vassal ruler in the western delta city of Sais, gradually consolidated control over the entire Nile Valley through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic negotiation, and strategic alliance with Greek and Carian mercenaries whose superior military capabilities proved decisive in overcoming regional resistance. The establishment of the 26th dynasty represented more than simple political reunification. It initiated a conscious program of cultural revival that looked backward to Egypt's glorious past, while simultaneously embracing foreign innovations that would enable the kingdom to compete effectively in an increasingly interconnected, ancient world. The military foundation of site power rested primarily on professional foreign mercenary units recruited from the Greek islands and the Anatolian coast. Warriors whose bronze armour, iron weapons and disciplined phalanx tactics provided Egyptian armies with capabilities that native Egyptian military traditions could not match. Archaeological evidence from the mercenary settlement at Naucratis reveals a cosmopolitan military community where Greek hoplites, Carian infantry and Phoenician naval specialists lived alongside Egyptian administrators and craftsmen, creating a multicultural environment that facilitated technological and cultural exchange. These foreign soldiers received land grants and regular pay in exchange for military service, establishing a professional military class that owed its loyalty directly to the pharaoh rather than to traditional Egyptian regional or religious authorities. Psamtik I's systematic conquest of Egypt required over a decade of sustained military operations as regional rulers throughout the kingdom resisted site expansion while maintaining their own mercenary forces and defensive alliances. The siege of Ashmaneen in Middle Egypt, lasting several months, demonstrated the sophisticated siege warfare capabilities that site armies had developed through the integration of foreign military techniques with traditional Egyptian strategic approaches. Greek engineers constructed elaborate siege works, including battering rams, scaling ladders, and protective mantlets, while Carian archers provided covering fire that suppressed defensive resistance from the city walls. The successful reduction of this strongly fortified position opened the route to Upper Egypt while demonstrating to potential opponents the futility of continued resistance against Scythe military power. The cultural policies of the early 26th dynasty reflected a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between political legitimacy and cultural continuity, as Scythe rulers consciously promoted the revival of ancient Egyptian artistic and religious traditions that had been neglected or modified during the centuries of foreign rule and political fragmentation. This archaizing movement involved systematic study of Old and Middle Kingdom monuments, with royal scribes and artists carefully copying ancient texts, architectural details, and sculptural styles to ensure accurate reproduction of classical Egyptian cultural forms. The tomb of Mentemheb at Saqqara, constructed during Psamtik I's reign, features relief sculptures that reproduce Middle Kingdom artistic conventions with such precision that modern scholars initially dated the monument several centuries earlier than its actual construction period. The religious revival accompanying political reunification extended beyond mere restoration of traditional ceremonial practices to encompass fundamental theological innovations that enhanced royal authority while accommodating the cosmopolitan character of Scythe Egypt. The divine adoratress of Amun, a position held by royal women who served as the earthly consorts of the god Amun at Thebes, became a crucial instrument for maintaining royal control over Upper Egypt's powerful religious institutions. Psamtik Thut's daughter Nitocris was formally adopted by the incumbent divine adoratress and eventually assumed this position, providing the Scythe dynasty with direct influence over Theban religious affairs while maintaining the fiction of institutional continuity. This arrangement enabled effective royal control over the enormous wealth and administrative apparatus of Amun's temples while respecting traditional religious hierarchies and avoiding direct confrontation with established priestly families. The administrative innovations of the 26th dynasty demonstrated remarkable adaptability in combining traditional Egyptian governmental structures with foreign administrative techniques that enhance bureaucratic efficiency while maintaining cultural authenticity. The nomarch system, which had provided the foundation for provincial administration since the Old Kingdom, was extensively reformed to ensure direct royal control over regional authorities while eliminating the hereditary aspects that had enabled provincial independence during earlier periods of central weakness. Royal appointees, selected for their administrative competence and personal loyalty rather than hereditary status, replaced traditional nomarchs throughout Egypt, creating a more centralized and responsive governmental system. The economic prosperity that characterized the Scythe period resulted from systematic exploitation of Egypt's strategic position at the intersection of African, Asian, and Mediterranean trade networks, as royal policies encouraged foreign merchants while maintaining Egyptian control over the most profitable aspects of international commerce. The establishment of Naucratis as a designated trading centre for Greek merchants created a controlled environment where foreign commercial activities could be monitored and taxed, while preventing the kind of unrestricted foreign settlement that had contributed to the Hyksos conquest centuries earlier. Egyptian authorities collected substantial revenues from customs duties, harbour fees and trading licenses, while Greek merchants gained access to Egyptian markets and products including grain, linen, papyrus, and luxury manufactured goods. The reign of Necho II witnessed the most ambitious territorial expansion and infrastructure development projects of the Scythe period, as the pharaoh's military campaigns in Palestine and his attempted construction of a canal connecting the Nile with the Red Sea demonstrated the restored kingdom's confidence in its ability to undertake large-scale strategic initiatives. Necho's Palestinian campaigns, though ultimately unsuccessful in preventing Babylonian expansion into the Levant, revealed Egyptian military capabilities that enabled sustained operations in foreign territory while maintaining effective supply lines across the Sinai Peninsula. The Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC, where Egyptian forces suffered decisive defeat at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian army, marked the end of Egyptian attempts to restore imperial control over the Levant while demonstrating the limitations of site military power when confronted by the professional armies of major Near Eastern empires. The canal project, initiated by Necho II, represented one of the most ambitious engineering undertakings in ancient history, involving the excavation of a waterway that would connect the easternmost branch of the Nile with the Bitter Lakes, and ultimately provide direct water transportation between Egypt and the Red Sea. Contemporary sources suggest that over 120,000 workers died during the construction process, indicating the enormous scale of labour mobilisation required for this project, while revealing the human costs of such ambitious undertakings. Although Necho abandoned the project before completion, probably due to the enormous expense and technical difficulties encountered, the attempt demonstrated Egyptian engineering capabilities and strategic vision that anticipated later Persian and Ptolemaic infrastructure projects. The naval expeditions sponsored by Necho II included the famous circumnavigation of Africa by Phoenician sailors, an achievement that demonstrated the pharaoh's interest in geographical exploration and his willingness to invest royal resources in projects that might expand Egyptian knowledge of distant lands and potential trading opportunities. The 3-year voyage, documented by Herodotus, involved Phoenician crews sailing southward through the Red Sea, around the southern tip of Africa, and northward through the Atlantic to return to Egypt via the Mediterranean Sea. While modern scholars debate the historical accuracy of this account, the expedition reflects the international character of Site Egypt and the dynasty's commitment to maintaining Egyptian prominence in an increasingly interconnected ancient world. The cultural achievements of the Site period extended beyond political and military accomplishments to encompass significant developments in art, literature, and religious thought that would influence Egyptian civilization throughout the remainder of the pharaonic period. Site sculptors developed distinctive artistic styles that combine the technical precision of classical Egyptian art with subtle innovations that reflected contemporary aesthetic preferences and foreign influences. The famous statue of Menkaure and his wife, created during the 26th dynasty, demonstrates the extraordinary skill of Site craftsmen in reproducing Old Kingdom sculptural conventions while incorporating refined details and surface treatments that surpass their ancient prototypes in technical execution. The literary production of the Site period included both faithful copies of ancient texts and original compositions that addressed contemporary concerns while maintaining traditional Egyptian literary forms and conventions. The Demotic Chronicle, composed during the late Site period, presents a historical narrative that interprets recent Egyptian political developments in terms of divine judgment and moral causation, reflecting sophisticated historical thinking that combined traditional Egyptian religious concepts with contemporary political analysis. This text demonstrates the intellectual vitality of Site Egyptian culture, while revealing how educated Egyptians understood their kingdom's position within the broader context of ancient, Near Eastern political developments. The Persian conquest of Egypt in 525 BC under Cambyses II represented a fundamental transformation in the kingdom's political status, as Egypt became a satrapy within the vast Achaemenid Empire, rather than an independent kingdom ruled by native pharaohs. Unlike previous foreign conquests that had involved the replacement of one royal dynasty with another, Persian rule imposed an entirely different administrative system that integrated Egypt into a larger imperial structure, while maintaining many traditional Egyptian governmental and religious institutions. Cambyses adopted traditional pharaonic titles and participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies, demonstrating Persian awareness of the importance of cultural continuity for maintaining political stability while asserting imperial authority over Egyptian resources and strategic positions. The administrative structure established by Persian authorities in Egypt combined traditional Egyptian governmental institutions with Achaemenid imperial administrative practices, creating hybrid systems that enabled effective governance while maintaining cultural authenticity. The satrap, appointed directly by the Persian king and responsible for all aspects of provincial administration, worked through existing Egyptian bureaucratic structures while introducing Persian officials into key positions that controlled military forces, tax collection, and communication with the imperial court. This system enabled the Persians to extract substantial revenues from Egyptian agricultural and commercial activities, while minimizing the administrative costs and cultural disruption that might have provoked widespread resistance. Persian cultural policies in Egypt demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the relationship between religious legitimacy and political stability, as Achaemenid rulers generally supported traditional Egyptian religious institutions while introducing Persian religious practices and administrative personnel. The famous inscription of Darius III at the Hybis Temple in the Kharga Oasis reveals the Persian king participating in traditional Egyptian temple foundation ceremonies while claiming divine sanction from Egyptian deities for his imperial authority. This approach enabled Persian rule to maintain legitimacy among Egyptian populations while ensuring that religious institutions remained subordinate to imperial political objectives. The economic integration of Egypt into the Persian Empire created unprecedented opportunities for commercial exchange and cultural interaction, as Egyptian products gained access to markets throughout the vast Achaemenid territories, while foreign goods and techniques flowed into Egypt through imperial trade networks. Egyptian grain exports helped feed the populations of Persian administrative centres throughout the empire, while Egyptian craftsmen found new markets for their specialised products, including linen textiles, papyrus, and luxury manufactured goods. The standardisation of weights, measures and currency throughout the Persian Empire facilitated commercial transactions while reducing the transaction costs that had previously limited long-distance trade. The Persian period witnessed significant technological and cultural innovations in Egypt as imperial connections provided access to foreign knowledge and techniques that enhanced Egyptian capabilities in various fields. Persian irrigation technology, developed in the arid regions of Iran and Central Asia, was adapted to Egyptian conditions and enabled the cultivation of previously marginal agricultural areas while improving the productivity of existing farmland. The introduction of new crops, including rice and various fruit trees, diversified Egyptian agricultural production while providing new sources of nutrition and commercial value. The rebellion of Inaros around 460 BC marked the beginning of sustained Egyptian resistance to Persian rule, as native leaders throughout the Delta and Upper Egypt coordinated military operations designed to expel Persian forces and restore independent Egyptian government. This uprising, supported by Athenian naval forces that provided crucial military assistance and strategic coordination, demonstrated that Egyptian populations retained both the capability and the desire for independent political organisation, despite decades of Persian administrative control. The initial success of the rebellion, which established Egyptian control over much of the Delta region for several years, revealed weaknesses in Persian defensive arrangements while encouraging additional resistance movements throughout the satrapy. The eventual suppression of Inaros's rebellion required massive Persian military intervention, including the deployment of elite imperial forces and the systematic siege of rebel strongholds throughout the Delta region. The Persian reconquest involved innovative military techniques, including the diversion of water channels to isolate island fortresses and the construction of elaborate siege works that enabled systematic reduction of Egyptian defensive positions. The brutal suppression of the rebellion, including the execution of captured leaders and the deportation of entire populations suspected of supporting the resistance, demonstrated Persian determination to maintain imperial control while warning potential future rebels of the consequences of challenging imperial authority. Amyrtaeus, the sole pharaoh of the 28th dynasty, successfully established independent Egyptian rule around 404 BC through military campaigns that exploited Persian preoccupation with rebellions in other parts of the empire and conflicts with Greek city-states. His reign, lasting only 6 years, demonstrated that Egyptian military capabilities remained sufficient for achieving independence when Persian forces were deployed elsewhere, though the limited duration of his rule revealed the difficulties of maintaining independent government against the superior resources that Persia could eventually mobilize for reconquest. Archaeological evidence from Amyrtaeus' reign is extremely limited, suggesting that his government controlled only portions of Egypt, while Persian forces retained strongholds in strategic locations throughout the kingdom. The 29th dynasty, established by Nepherites I around 398 BC, represented a more successful attempt at restoring independent Egyptian government through systematic military organization and diplomatic alliance with Persian enemies, including Greek city-states and rebellious Persian satraps. Nepherites and his successors maintained independent rule for approximately 2 decades by exploiting Persian involvement in conflicts with Sparta and other Greek powers while building military capabilities based on Greek mercenary forces and Egyptian resources. The dynasty's capital at Mendes in the central delta provided access to agricultural wealth and commercial networks while maintaining defensible positions against Persian reconquest attempts. Nectanebo I, founder of the 30th dynasty around 380 BC, achieved the most successful restoration of independent Egyptian government during the late period through military innovations that combined traditional Egyptian strategic advantages with foreign military technologies and tactical approaches. His successful defense against Persian invasion attempts in 373 BC involved coordinated land and naval operations that utilized Egypt's geographic advantages while deploying Greek mercenary forces trained in contemporary military techniques. The flooding of Persian siege works through the manipulation of irrigation channels demonstrated Egyptian engineering capabilities while revealing the continuing strategic importance of controlling the Nile's waters for defensive purposes. The reign of Nectanebo II witnessed the final flowering of independent Egyptian civilization as the pharaoh's extensive building programs and cultural patronage created monuments that rivaled those of earlier periods while maintaining distinctly late-period characteristics. The Temple of Isis at Philae, begun during Nectanebo II's reign, represents the culmination of late-period religious architecture with its sophisticated integration of traditional Egyptian design elements and contemporary decorative innovations. The temple's island location required complex engineering solutions for foundation construction, while its architectural program incorporated religious themes that reflected the syncretic theological developments of the late period. The final Persian reconquest under Artaxerxes III in 343 BC involved systematic military operations that overcame Egyptian defensive preparations through superior numbers, advanced siege equipment, and strategic coordination that prevented effective Egyptian resistance. The Persian army, including substantial Greek mercenary contingents and specialized siege engineers, methodically reduced Egyptian strongholds throughout the delta while preventing the coordination of defensive efforts that had enabled earlier successful resistance movements. The flight of Nectanebo II to Nubia marked the end of the last native Egyptian dynasty and the restoration of Persian imperial control that would persist until Alexander's conquest 2 decades later. The arrival of Alexander the Great in Egypt in 332 BC represented not merely another foreign conquest, but the beginning of a fundamental transformation that would permanently alter Egyptian civilization's relationship with the Mediterranean world. Alexander's relatively peaceful occupation of Egypt, facilitated by widespread Egyptian hostility to Persian rule and the Macedonian king's careful respect for Egyptian religious traditions, established patterns of foreign rule that would characterize the subsequent Ptolemaic period. The foundation of Alexandria as a new capital city oriented toward the Mediterranean, rather than the Nile Valley, symbolized Egypt's integration into a broader Hellenistic world while maintaining the cultural and religious traditions that had sustained Egyptian civilization for over 3 millennia. Alexander's conquest of Egypt in 332 BC proceeded with remarkable ease as Egyptian populations, still resentful of Persian rule under Darius III, welcomed the Macedonian forces as liberators rather than conquerors. The young king's strategic decision to present himself as a traditional pharaoh rather than a foreign occupier proved crucial for maintaining stability during the transition period. Alexander participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies at Memphis, received coronation according to ancient pharaonic rituals, and most significantly undertook the arduous journey across the western desert to consult the oracle of Amun at Siwar Oasis. This pilgrimage, requiring a dangerous trek through hundreds of kilometers of trackless desert, demonstrated Alexander's commitment to Egyptian religious traditions while providing divine legitimization for his rule through the oracle's proclamation that he was the son of Amun-Ra. The foundation of Alexandria in 331 BC represented Alexander's most enduring contribution to Egyptian civilization and would fundamentally alter the kingdom's orientation from an African Nile-centered state toward a Mediterranean maritime power. Alexander personally selected the site on the western edge of the Nile Delta, where a natural harbour formed by Pharos Island provided excellent anchorage, while the location offered access to both the fertile delta agricultural regions and Mediterranean trade routes. The city's planned layout, designed by the architect Dinocrates of Rhodes, incorporated Hippodamian grid principles with wide boulevards intersecting at right angles, creating an urban environment that could accommodate the massive population growth that would make Alexandria one of the ancient world's largest cities. The construction of Alexandria required unprecedented coordination of resources and labour, as thousands of workers laboured to create harbours, residential districts, public buildings, and the infrastructure necessary for a major Mediterranean port city. The Great Harbour, protected by a massive breakwater connecting the mainland to Pharos Island, could accommodate hundreds of vessels simultaneously while providing secure anchorage during the violent storms that frequently struck the Mediterranean coast. The construction of this harbour involved moving enormous quantities of stone and earth to create artificial barriers against wave action, demonstrating engineering capabilities that rivaled the great construction projects of earlier pharaonic periods. Alexander's sudden death in Babylon in 323 BC created a succession crisis that would ultimately result in the division of his vast empire among his generals, with Ptolemy van Sota securing control over Egypt and establishing the dynasty that would rule the kingdom for nearly 3 centuries. Ptolemy's initial position as satrap of Egypt provided him with access to the kingdom's enormous agricultural wealth and strategic location, advantages that proved crucial during the prolonged warfare among Alexander's successors. His successful defence of Egypt against invasion attempts by other Macedonian generals demonstrated both military competence and the strategic value of Egypt's geographic position, surrounded by deserts that channeled potential invaders into predictable routes where they could be effectively opposed. The establishment of the Ptolemaic dynasty required careful balance between maintaining Macedonian, Greek cultural identity and adapting to Egyptian political and religious traditions necessary for legitimizing foreign rule over native populations. Ptolemy III and his successors adopted traditional pharaonic titles and participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies while simultaneously promoting Greek culture and immigration that would create Alexandria's distinctive Hellenistic character. This dual approach enabled the Ptolemies to maintain support among both Greek immigrants, who formed the kingdom's administrative and military elite, and Egyptian populations, who provided agricultural labour and traditional craft production. The Great Library of Alexandria, established during the early Ptolemaic period, represented the ancient world's most ambitious attempt to collect and preserve human knowledge through systematic acquisition of texts from throughout the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds. Royal agents stationed at Alexandria's harbour reportedly confiscated all books found on incoming ships, creating copies for return to their owners while retaining originals for the library's collection. This aggressive acquisition policy, combined with royal patronage that attracted scholars from throughout the Hellenistic world, created an intellectual centre that housed an estimated 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls, covering subjects ranging from mathematics and astronomy to literature and medicine. The Museum of Alexandria, closely associated with the library, functioned as a research institute where royal stipends supported scholars pursuing advanced studies in various fields of knowledge. This institution, literally meaning Shrine of the Muses, provided facilities including lecture halls, laboratories, botanical gardens, and an astronomical observatory that enabled systematic scientific investigation. Scholars associated with the museum made fundamental contributions to mathematics, including Euclid's geometric principles and Archimedes' mechanical innovations, while astronomers like Aristarchus proposed heliocentric theories that anticipated later European scientific developments by over a millennium. The fusion of Greek and Egyptian cultures under Ptolemaic rule created distinctive artistic and architectural traditions that combined Hellenistic techniques with traditional Egyptian religious and symbolic content. Temple construction throughout Ptolemaic Egypt maintained traditional Egyptian architectural forms and decorative programs, while incorporating Greek engineering techniques and materials that enhanced structural stability and artistic refinement. The Temple of Horus at Edfu, constructed during the Ptolemaic period, represents the finest example of this cultural synthesis, with its traditional Egyptian layout and religious iconography executed with Greek precision in stone cutting and architectural proportion. The cult of Serapis, artificially created during the reign of Ptolemy I, exemplified the dynasty's conscious efforts to create religious institutions that would appeal to both Greek and Egyptian populations while supporting royal authority. This syncretic deity combined attributes of the Egyptian Osiris with characteristics of Greek gods including Zeus, Dionysus, and Asclepius, creating a composite divine figure that could serve as patron of the Ptolemaic dynasty while providing religious focus for Alexandria's multicultural population. The Serapeum, Serapis' main temple in Alexandria, became one of the ancient world's most magnificent religious complexes, with its massive columns, elaborate sculptural decoration, and library collection that rivaled the Great Library itself. Ptolemy II, Philadelphus presided over the golden age of Ptolemaic Egypt as royal patronage supported unprecedented cultural and scientific achievements, while territorial expansion extended Egyptian influence throughout the eastern Mediterranean. His marriage to his sister Arsinoe II, following pharaonic precedent but shocking Greek sensibilities, demonstrated the dynasty's adaptation of Egyptian royal practices while maintaining Macedonian political control. The royal couple's joint rule, commemorated in numerous inscriptions and artistic representations, established patterns of sibling marriage that would characterize Ptolemaic succession practices throughout the dynasty's history. The economic policies of Ptolemy II created the most sophisticated state-controlled economy in the ancient world through royal monopolies over key industries including oil production, textile manufacturing, and papyrus production that generated enormous revenues for the crown. Royal agents supervised every aspect of agricultural production, from seed distribution to harvest collection, while detailed records tracked productivity levels and tax obligations for individual farms throughout the kingdom. This administrative system, documented in thousands of papyrus texts discovered at sites throughout Egypt, reveals bureaucratic complexity that surpassed even the most elaborate governmental systems of earlier pharaonic periods. The territorial expansion under Ptolemy II extended Egyptian control over Cyprus, southern Anatolia, and various Aegean islands while establishing Egyptian naval supremacy throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The Ptolemaic navy, based at Alexandria and other harbour cities throughout the kingdom, included massive warships with multiple banks of oars, that could carry hundreds of marines and siege equipment for amphibious operations against enemy strongholds. The construction and maintenance of these fleets required enormous resources and specialised technical knowledge as shipbuilders developed innovative designs that maximised combat effectiveness while maintaining seaworthiness in Mediterranean conditions. The Syrian Wars, a series of conflicts between the Ptolemaic and Seleucid empires lasting over a century, gradually drained Egyptian resources while demonstrating the limitations of Ptolemaic military capabilities when confronted by equally sophisticated opponents. These wars, fought primarily in Palestine and southern Syria, involved massive armies equipped with war elephants, cavalry units, and siege equipment that represented the pinnacle of Hellenistic military technology. The Battle of Raphia in 217 BC, where Ptolemy IV defeated Antiochus III in one of the largest battles of the ancient world, involved over 140,000 soldiers and demonstrated both the scale of Hellenistic warfare and the enormous costs of maintaining such military capabilities. The gradual weakening of Ptolemaic power during the 2nd and 1st centuries BC resulted from a combination of internal dynastic conflicts, external military pressures, and economic difficulties that undermined the kingdom's stability while creating opportunities for Roman intervention. The succession disputes that plagued later Ptolemaic reigns often involved multiple claimants supported by different factions within the royal court, leading to civil wars that devastated the kingdom's resources while inviting foreign interference. These conflicts typically pitted siblings against each other in struggles for royal authority, with competing claimants seeking support from Rome, Syria, or other foreign powers willing to intervene in Egyptian affairs. The native Egyptian revolts in Upper Egypt during the late Ptolemaic period revealed growing tensions between the Hellenistic ruling elite and Egyptian populations, who had become increasingly resentful of foreign domination and economic exploitation. These uprisings, led by native Egyptian priests and local officials, temporarily established independent Egyptian kingdoms in the Theban region, while demonstrating that traditional Egyptian political and religious institutions retained sufficient vitality to challenge Ptolemaic authority. The revolts required sustained military campaigns to suppress, further draining royal resources while highlighting the artificial nature of Ptolemaic rule over fundamentally Egyptian populations. Economic difficulties during the later Ptolemaic period stemmed from the enormous costs of maintaining large military forces, supporting elaborate court establishments, and funding the massive bureaucratic apparatus necessary for governing the kingdom's diverse territories and populations. The debasement of Ptolemaic currency reflected declining royal revenues as agricultural productivity stagnated and international trade faced increasing competition from Roman merchants and other Mediterranean commercial networks. Papyrus documents from this period reveal widespread tax evasion, administrative corruption, and economic hardship among both Greek and Egyptian populations. Despite these internal difficulties, Egypt remained the ancient world's most productive agricultural region and continued to serve as the primary grain supplier for Mediterranean urban centres, including Rome, Athens, and other major cities whose populations depended on imported food supplies. The Nile's annual flood continued to deposit fertile silt across the delta and valley agricultural areas, while Egyptian farmers maintained the irrigation systems and cultivation techniques that had sustained the kingdom's agricultural prosperity for millennia. This agricultural wealth provided the economic foundation that enabled Egypt to maintain its independence longer than other Hellenistic kingdoms, while making it an attractive target for Roman expansion. Cleopatra VII, the last effective ruler of Ptolemaic Egypt, inherited a kingdom facing existential threats from internal rebellion, economic crisis, and increasing Roman interference in Egyptian affairs. Her accession to the throne around 51 BC occurred during a period of civil war in Rome between Julius Caesar and Pompey, creating both opportunities and dangers for Egyptian foreign policy. Cleopatra's initial alliance with Pompey, following traditional Egyptian policy of supporting established Roman authority, proved disastrous when Caesar's victory at Pharsalus in 48 BC left her on the losing side of the Roman civil war. Caesar's arrival in Alexandria in pursuit of Pompey created the opportunity for Cleopatra's famous seduction of the Roman general, though this relationship involved sophisticated political calculation rather than simple romantic attraction. Cleopatra, who spoke at least 9 languages and had received the finest education available in the ancient world, recognized that her kingdom's survival depended on securing the support of Rome's most powerful leader. Her dramatic arrival at Caesar's residence concealed in a carpet or linen bag, as described by ancient sources, demonstrated both theatrical flair and political desperation as she sought to gain personal access to the Roman commander while avoiding her brother Ptolemy III's attempts to prevent their meeting. The relationship between Cleopatra and Caesar produced both personal and political benefits for the Egyptian queen, as Caesar's military support enabled her to defeat her brother's forces and secure undisputed control over Egypt, while their son, Caesarion, provided potential legitimacy for continued Ptolemaic rule. Caesar's brief residence in Alexandria exposed him to the kingdom's wealth and cultural sophistication, leading to his support for Cleopatra's territorial ambitions and his protection of Egyptian independence against other Roman political leaders who favoured direct annexation. The famous Nile cruise undertaken by Caesar and Cleopatra served both romantic and political purposes, demonstrating Roman respect for Egyptian sovereignty while allowing Caesar to assess the kingdom's resources and strategic value. Caesar's assassination in 44 BC created a new succession crisis in Rome that would ultimately prove fatal to Egyptian independence, as Cleopatra's support for Mark Antony in his conflict with Octavian placed Egypt directly in the path of Roman civil war. Antony's eastern campaigns against Parthia required enormous financial resources that only Egypt could provide, while his growing dependence on Cleopatra's support gradually alienated him from Roman public opinion and political allies. The relationship between Antony and Cleopatra, producing 3 children and involving elaborate public ceremonies that proclaimed their joint rule over eastern territories, represented a fundamental challenge to Roman republican traditions and Octavian's authority as Caesar's heir. The propaganda war between Octavian and Antony involved systematic efforts to portray their conflict in terms of Roman virtue versus foreign decadence, with Cleopatra serving as the symbol of Oriental luxury and corruption that threatened Roman moral values. Octavian supporters depicted Antony as a weak-willed victim of Egyptian seduction who had abandoned his Roman identity in favour of Eastern luxury and despotism. This propaganda campaign, documented in contemporary literary sources including Horace's poetry and Plutarch's biographies, successfully portrayed the coming conflict as a defence of Roman civilization against foreign contamination, rather than a civil war between competing Roman leaders. The Battle of Actium on September 2nd, 31 BC represented the decisive naval engagement that would determine both the outcome of the Roman Civil War and the fate of Ptolemaic Egypt. The battle involved over 500 warships, as Octavian's fleet, commanded by Marcus Agrippa, engaged the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra in the waters off the western coast of Greece. Cleopatra's decision to withdraw her squadron from the battle, followed by Antony's abandonment of his own forces to pursue her, resulted in the collapse of their naval coalition and the surrender of their remaining land forces to Octavian. Contemporary accounts of Actium reveal a complex tactical situation in which Octavian's superior naval organisation and Agrippa's strategic planning overcame the larger ships and more numerous forces available to Antony and Cleopatra. The Egyptian queen's warships, built for Mediterranean conditions and equipped with bronze rams and catapults, proved less manoeuvrable than Octavian's vessels in the confined waters where the battle occurred. The psychological impact of Cleopatra's withdrawal, whether planned as a strategic retreat or resulting from panic during the engagement, destroyed the morale of Antony's forces while providing Octavian, with a decisive victory that would establish his supremacy over the Roman world. The aftermath of Actium involved Octavian's systematic pursuit of Antony and Cleopatra to Egypt, where the final act of the Ptolemaic dynasty would unfold during the siege of Alexandria in 30 BC. Antony's suicide, following false reports of Cleopatra's death, eliminated the last significant opposition to Octavian's authority, while leaving the Egyptian queen to negotiate directly with the future Augustus. Cleopatra's final attempts to preserve some form of independence for Egypt, possibly through seduction of Octavian or arrangements for her children's succession, failed as the Roman leader recognized that complete annexation offered greater strategic and economic advantages than continued client kingdom status. Cleopatra's suicide on August 12th, 30 BC, traditionally attributed to the bite of an asp, though possibly involving poison concealed in a hairpin or other personal item, marked the end of both the Ptolemaic dynasty and Egyptian independence after over 3 millennia of pharaonic rule. Her death, carefully staged to maintain royal dignity, while denying Octavian the propaganda value of displaying her in his triumph, demonstrated the same political calculation that had characterized her entire reign. The deaths of Caesarion and Antony's older son by Cleopatra eliminated potential rivals to Octavian's authority, while ensuring that no legitimate claimants to Egyptian royal succession survived. Egypt's incorporation into the Roman Empire under Augustus represented a fundamental transformation in the kingdom's political status, as the former pharaonic state became a personal possession of the Roman emperor, rather than a regular province governed through traditional republican institutions. This special status reflected Egypt's enormous strategic and economic importance, as the kingdom's grain production remained essential for feeding Rome's population, while its wealth provided crucial resources for imperial administration and military operations. Augustus established residence restrictions that prevented Roman senators from entering Egypt without imperial permission, demonstrating his recognition of the kingdom's potential as a power base for ambitious rivals. The Roman administrative system imposed on Egypt maintained many Ptolemaic governmental structures, while introducing Roman legal principles and administrative practices that would influence the kingdom's development throughout the imperial period. The Roman prefect, appointed directly by the emperor and responsible for all aspects of Egyptian administration, governed through existing bureaucratic institutions while ensuring that Egyptian resources served imperial rather than local interests. This system enabled efficient extraction of Egypt's agricultural surplus and tax revenues, while minimizing the administrative costs and cultural disruption that might have provoked widespread resistance. The cultural legacy of pharaonic Egypt would survive Roman conquest and continue to influence Mediterranean civilization throughout the imperial period and beyond. Egyptian religious practices, artistic traditions, and intellectual achievements had already spread throughout the Hellenistic world during the Ptolemaic period, while the preservation of ancient texts and monuments in Egypt would provide future generations with access to the wisdom and achievements of one of humanity's greatest civilizations. The end of pharaonic rule marked not the destruction of Egyptian culture, but rather its transformation into a component of the broader Mediterranean world that would preserve and transmit Egyptian contributions to human knowledge and artistic expression. Thus concluded over 3 millennia of pharaonic civilization, from the unification under Narmer around 3100 BC to Cleopatra's death in 30 BC. The extraordinary longevity of Egyptian civilization, surviving foreign conquests, internal upheavals, and fundamental changes in the ancient world's political and cultural landscape, testifies to the strength of the institutions, beliefs, and practices that the ancient Egyptians had developed along the life-giving waters of the Nile. While pharaonic Egypt had ended, its influence would continue to shape human civilization through its contributions to art, architecture, religion, science, and government that remain relevant and inspiring to the present day,